identify is like A equals A. What the fuck are you talking about, man? Identifying is a confirmation.
Then why would you allow someone to just change?
No. That's just like I mean, you're kind of obviously semantically wrong about what the word means, but my point is to respond to Wick as well, right? Because
okay, I swear to God, I will take myself. I will walk into the sea.
Just know that you are using terminally online lingo, and he's just using it in a different way. That doesn't mean
one of us is correct, and the correct one is me.
He already got upset earlier by RJ saying he was incorrect. Now Wick is here.
I'm getting a sense that there's a lot of performative outrage about semantics here. Like everybody knows exactly what the fuck Wick is talking about, and you're just freaking out, dude. Like chill out. Holy shit. Oh, we get it. You're correct. Okay.
I know. I'm equally correct on both of these. I cannot believe both of you disagree with this. Like.
I guess we could start. I guess my first question. RJ said a lot of my questions didn't make sense to him, but if that's the case, RJ, just let me know if you have a question. Okay, so welcome to Chaoscast. Usually we do not serious topics like we do whether nodding to somebody's picture when they are not knowledge of it is a violation of their consent, or things like when does tanning become problematic. But I like the transracialism debate. I think it's very interesting, and I actually wanted to do like a semi-serious debate this weekend. So yes, welcome to the Transracialism debate. So the first question I have is, does the claim to an identity require the lived experience of it? And I guess we could just start with that if you guys want.
Sure. Could I? I'll take a swing here.
Yeah.
Because I think I kind of sit in the middle, so maybe people that have a little stronger feelings either way can then respond to what I say. Sam Harris, interesting to start off with him. He has like a funny way of talking about. I was listening to one of his podcasts where he talks about what's it called, meditation, and he talks about the idea that when we're looking at religious claims, we have to see if there's a there, if there's something behind the claim, right? He compares prayer to meditation. There's not a lot of scientific anything behind prayer, right? But there is behind meditation. Meditation does like people, all sorts of cognitive stuff, right? I think there's a similar conversation to be had when it comes to transracialism. I think there's a there. There's something that's being addressed that is a societal, wrinkle that I think is being expressed when people give into the hypothetical, but I still can't totally say that I'm 100% for it, and I 100% kind of understand it in the same way that I would when it comes to the arguments behind gender identity that I see in a lot of transgender theorists and stuff. It seems as if people are trying to take a preset like sort of logical path and apply it to race, saying, well, if this is sort of a syllogism, if X is true about gender, then Y must be true about race, and that doesn't seem to necessarily be true. We have all kinds of social constructions that are complicated, but we have any social constructions that play into both an internal experience and an external experience. I've been talking for a long time, so I'll leave it there. It seems like there's a there. There's something people are speaking to. There is an element of an internal experience to any identity. Zonia, who's going to be hopping here in a second, she put a really good video in the group chat by T1J, where he kind of makes that point that identity kind of by its in and of itself is partially an internal process. But I also kind of feel the other side that I don't know if this like, well, if it's true for Y, it has to be true for X is necessarily true. It seems that there's a much more extrinsic factor to racial identification. So I'll leave it up.
Wow, there's a lot here.
Just jump in or raise your hand if you have if you're having trouble jumping in, just raise your hand. Hello, Cherry. Hello, Zonia. Yes. Okay. So who wants to go next? Sorry. Okay, no, nothing. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
So, I think Kobe and I, Kobe, is Kobe your Dominus Rangers?
Yeah, sorry. That was a meme from an earlier panel.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So I think broadly share the same intuitions, although I don't really like this view that there's like an internal and external dichotomy, and that like experience is something that happens internal and then there's an external kind of matching up with it. I think that doesn't really accurately describe what the self is like. And I don't think that's how you come to self-identification anything. It's like your experience is situated in a world, and it's always a give and take. Things are co-constituted by the external and the internal in much more of a unitary way. But the way that social constructs work in general, I think that what you're going to find when people are trying to take something like transgenderism and then like try to do like run you down a dialogue tree with the syllogism and like why is transracialism different, is there's just a kind of ignoring that happens of how these things actually are. When we have a social construct, we know generally what race is, even though there's not any essential factor or definition that we can describe a race. The same goes for gender, but yet these things are meaningfully different. We have different meanings that are assigned to these terms, and how they work in society is different from each other. So it shouldn't be that obvious or that difficult to understand how one of those things is acceptable and one of those things is not, because we're talking about different things, and the way that we socially construct these things, the meanings that they have, is different. And whether or not things can change, that's always kind of like a future-oriented perspective. But how things are as a matter of fact right now, like we don't accept transracial identities, we do accept transgender identities, and that's because we have very different understandings of these social constructs and how we come to understanding how somebody has a race and how they have a gender.
Okay, so I think that it's important in this discussion to really kind of get at the root of this, is to recognize that when we talk about transracialism, we may not be talking about the same thing. There are several different types of transracialism that we can talk about. There's one that was in the article linked where someone poses or considers himself of an ethnicity that they were not born as. But we also have to recognize there are other things involved. When we talk about transracial issues, it would behoove us to also speak about transracial adoption. And so what that is when someone of a different race is adopted by, like say you have two white parents and they adopt a child of color, and raise that child of color in a culture that they would not normally be raised in. They can feel a lot of disconnect from their original culture. And I think that is an entirely different situation than what we would look at if we were looking at Dolezal or someone else in that kind of category. And so when we talk, it really comes down to identity, and at what point, like, does society have a say in what you identify as and what you can. I think that when we talk about lived experience, a society kind of almost requires it in a lot of cases, like to accept whatever identity that you wish to have. It makes it far easier for society to accept it if you can also demonstrate that you've lived experience. Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'm not here to discuss, but I'm here to discuss what is. And as we exist now, I think that's how things are, for better or worse.
Okay. I know
Sure, yeah.
no nothing wanted to pop in here. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we veered off a bit from the initial question that was asked, but I guess I'll just bring back to it because that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, so as to like whether you need to have lived experience with a certain identity to be able to have that identity, I think it's pretty clearly no, you don't need that. Although the more you live with such an identity, the more it kind of becomes a part of you. Like, I don't think anybody's going to question that a 1-year-old baby who's like born black, let's say, still has the identity of being a black baby, despite the fact that it had just been born. Or a transgender woman who had just transitioned has the identity of a woman, even though she just transitioned. So I don't think you need the lived experience, but I think the longer you live with that identity, the more it becomes ingrained into you. And yeah.
What is the benefit of changing your race? Why does somebody need to, let's say, in their adulthood, would require that society moving forward identify them as black? Or accept that they identify themselves as black? What is the reason? Because I know for Rachel Dolezal, her specific reason was that in black circles for black political movements, that her voice was not taken seriously, and in order to fight for black issues, she herself realized that she needed to be black to get into the rooms. She needed to be black to get her president position in the NAACP. So
That's not what she said in
that,
her book.
clearly
though.
there's no reason. There's no good reason. It's
Sorry to interrupt, but that's not what she said in her book. In her book, she said that she found that she was looking for a community that she could identify with and felt comfortable with, or something like that along those lines, which is why it was criticized by a lot of different people.
Her own words in an interview after writing her book.
Okay. I know like a lot of people criticized that because they said, oh, so you basically shopped around for another race that you could identify, and that sounds like a very privileged thing that only a white person could do. I remember that being a major criticism at the time.
It came off the same vibes as wanting to be the CEO of BLM. She basically had the idea that she could progress the movement better than Black people could. And because her voice wasn't taken seriously, she felt the need to change her race. And that's when she fucking was taken seriously. And that is a shit fucking reason. What is it hard for you to be an ally and be white in these movements? Okay, then just like work through that. I don't know. Maybe you did a shit job. Maybe you're not actually an ally if you felt the need to appropriate someone's culture to then become president of their fucking movement. Maybe you're not an ally.
So this is actually a huge issue, especially in academic circles as well. For example, a couple months ago, I think it was a couple months ago, the New York Times Magazine published an incriminating outlook into the longstanding allegations around Andrea Smith, claiming that she's been posing as Cherokee when she was not. Neuroscientist Beth Ann McLaughlin admitted to pretending to be a Hopi scientist on Twitter. Jessica Krug was outed as pretending to be Afro-Latinx. Kelly Kien Sharp resigned after it was revealed she wasn't really Chicana. The list goes on. There's a lot of places where in academics and journalism that people have posed as a different race and ethnicity in order to gain to gain credence in those circles, is to lend weight to their arguments. And many times they do it. Their excuse for doing it is, oh, well, I wanted to advance the cause, and I felt this was the best way to do it.
Yeah,
this happens again and again and again.
Yeah, to jump in here a little bit. Like, I know a lot of people would immediately think of that as like you're pretending in heavy quotation marks to be an identity, to advocate for that identity, to be as a sign of like inauthenticity. But that's almost you could just as easily like switch that argument to the other side. Like if you have identified as this certain activity and you're trying to like advocate for that identity, a lot of people, like if they are new to an identity, they will be like more gung-ho about it. There are a lot of like, you see a lot of like recent religious converts are going to be like, they're going to know a lot more because it's fresh on their mind. They're going to dive into the culture a lot more.
I'm a Black woman. I'm so sorry if I read chat and somebody is just not sure why we're having a conversation with no Black people. I'm a fucking Black woman, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't say otherwise.
No, it's not you. Somebody in chat. Somebody in the text chat was saying whose idea was this to have this debate without any Black people. So
Okay.
That was for Stardust, not for you.
Okay, cool. So I think a lot of the questions posed in this panel are interesting. We're using transracialism as like a jumping off point, but I think they're really interesting in and of themselves. So like so far, what I've seen is like I don't know if there's been some contention in the panel so far, but I don't know if I disagree with anyone. I think there's a lot of nuance here. That's even a topic, especially a topic as contentious as this deserves the nuance that maybe if we're all drunk enough we can give to. Okay, so just like from what I've written down here, so this is the only thing I wrote down from your opening statement, Kobe. So I know this wasn't the entirety of it, but like the preset logic path from gender to race, I think that has positives and negatives to it. Like, so a lot of people were like, a lot of the reason I think the big hatred against transracialism is because it was like, well, if you can identify as another gender, why can't you identify as another race? And that was absolutely being applied in a terrible faith way. To which, like, if you were to try to like bring up these like, okay, a good faith, like, hey, let's look at like why those things are different. Let's like look at why are these parallels valid or not valid. but people weren't bringing it up in that way, and so like a lot of us instinctively, I know I did. I don't know, wouldn't speak for anyone else. I know I instinctively said, no, these motherfuckers are bringing up transracialism in order to discriminate and invalidate trans people, and so I'm not going to take it seriously. And so that is I did that, and if someone is bad faith as fuck and doing that for that reason, like, yeah, I'm not gonna take that seriously. I'm going to reject them. But I think that if we're in our space where we can be intellectually honest, we don't have to like go against these bad faith actors, because I think everyone here is like here to have a cool conversation about really interesting topics intellectually. So I think we can have a good conversation about that. To finish my point, like 10 seconds because I ramble, I'm sorry. So yeah, there's differences between gender and race, but there are also enough similarities. So like, hey, let's have this conversation. Just like there are differences between like gender identity and sexuality, but it's still useful to use that like roadmap of like the gay rights movement to advocate for trans people, just like it was useful, although they're different, to use the like civil rights movement for black people to like advocate for gay people. Of course there are differences, but that roadmap there, it's not a bad thing. Make use of what you have.
Oh shit. Okay.
I did want to address that. I think that there's a argument that I'm a little biased against as well, which I do think actually does have, which I think Cherry brought up, which I do think has legitimacy to it, which is the way that this is weaponized by white people in places like academia to get ahead, the Krugs and the Dolezals. But I did want to provide what I could see as some positive examples of transracialism, and I have two ones. I'll link in chat. There's a really cool debate show that they have in South Africa called The Big Debate. It's kind of similar to like they have ones in like the UK where they just get people like random celebrities and like community activists and talk about issues. And one of the episodes, they talk about land reform. Obviously, South Africa used to be like a white supremacist country where all land was owned by white people, right? And still like 70% of ownable land is owned by a white minority, right? So they're trying to like redistribute land. And on the panel, there was a disagreement between people who identified as black and people who identified as Khorasan. Khorasan is one of the indigenous groups of South Africa. They go back a really long time. It's a very complicated history, and they are black. They appear black, but they do not identify as black at all. And there's actually like a fight in the show where people had to be removed because they're saying, "Do not call me black. I am not black. I am San. I'm et cetera, et cetera." I think that's like I think that while that's an example of a argument surrounding it, I think that is an example of a transracial identity. Somebody who is seen in wider South African society as being black, but within their community self-identifies with as a specific as Khorasan, as a different.
It's an incredible. That's an awesome.
Wow.
I think I just think it would be better for the second topic. Like fuck, I want to talk about that too. That's a really good point.
We can put a.
Wow.
I'm not trying to
I was
jump.
not expecting that one. I'm sorry.
I must have missed like. I wish you could repeat that, Kobe. They identify not as black. They identify as another name, but they are just. People look at them and assume that they're black.
Yeah. I can put a link in chat. Sorry, go ahead.
How is that different from like somebody looking at like a white person and be like, oh, that's a white person, and the white person's like, wait, I'm Irish. Like white and black are just categories. No, they're not like actual races.
They're social constructs, of course.
No.
Yeah. So I would argue that
country black, right?
Wait, sorry. Say again.
Some people would want something more specific than black. Like, I'm considered black, but I'm also like Dominican.
It's always contextual. Yeah.
But that's not transracial.
Well, the example that I brought up is because the individual in this panel completely rejected the identity of blackness 100%. They did not view themselves as that at all. They view themselves as a completely different categorization. I was trying to show
the South African panel.
Yes, yeah, it's a South African panel. Yeah. And so I was trying to show that, like in other societies, the fungibility between these categories is different than ours. I think that's an example of where, like I was saying, I think there's a there, and that's where I think one of the entrances to what it's trying to point out is.
I don't understand how that's transracialism. That's just them saying that where they're born is a different name than the name that you want to give it. Not that the way that they were born and when they grew up, they decide to be something completely different.
Yeah, I agree with Cherry here, right? Because like the way that most people are probably going to interpret being like someone, oh, that person is a black person around them, is going to be like they're going to be included in that group, irrespective of whether or not like, no, I am. What is this, Khorasan?
Yes.
Corson? Yeah, they're like, no, I'm Corson. I'm not black. It's like the person who's calling them black is probably thinking all Corson people are black. The same way many people think all Irish people are white. Right?
I suppose what I'm trying to get at here is that this is highlighting the fact that there is a internal element to racial identification. That it is not just the fact that they are identified in a larger society as black. There is a part of their internal identification, their internal ancestry, and the parts of their history that they privilege.
But where is the transitioning part?
So I guess the argument would be, the hypothetical would be somebody who grows up, who the idea would be somebody that grows up in a society, in the sort of a more mainstream South African society, black South African society, and then moves into this more Khorasan focused cultural society, making a transition there, right? It's not a perfect example, right? It could be different in other societies, but I think that'd be an example of somebody who grows up with one internal identification of race, but then later on in their life decides to go to a different one.
I know people who have
ask a
moved
few more
here
questions with this?
I know people who are, if you look at them from our perspective here in America, we think of them as black, but they come from other countries where they're not perceived that way, and where there's more nuance between the different groups of people in their country. They come here and suddenly they're very much placed in the racial bucket of being black. So I've definitely heard of that before. I don't think that constitutes any kind of I don't know if that would be a good argument for transracialism. I think it's more about that racial categories are sort of placed upon us by others, usually far less so than we place upon ourselves. We usually have our own internal sense of identification, other things that are important to us. Like, to me, I don't really identify very strongly as a trans woman, but the rest of the world does place that upon me because I'm not super passing, I have more masculine features, so the rest of the world is constantly reflecting upon me and second guessing what my gender is, and that forces me to have to address transgender positions and transgender issues, right? But I don't identify very strongly with it if nobody even cared, if nobody ever questioned what my gender was or tried to force upon me being a man. I would never even identify as transgender because it wouldn't matter. So it's through the lens of others that we're often painted as these things, as a race, etc. And I think that is more just having to do with, as a society, the way that we place importance on these things and the way that we value them. I don't know if that's a good argument for the fact that we don't internally identify these things very strongly to warrant transracialism.
I think it's really useful to talk about these ideas slightly divorced from transracialism and get around the topic, because there's a lot of good stuff there. Identity is not a one-way street. You cannot purely internally decide on your own identity. Your identity is always going to be a product of, well, what information and options do I have from my society? You can only identify as something based on the options that are given to you in a certain circumstance. To claim an identity is inherently a form of differentiation. I'm different from these other people. That doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Identities can be positive, they can be negative, they're neutral, but it requires a differentiation from the options that you have in our society. So that's why I think in this question, does the claim to an identity require the experience of having grown up with that identity? I don't think I think it's a pretty clear no. You can identify as something purely because it's what you. If we're just talking about broad identity.
I want to hear what Cherry said. Wait, guys. Cherry was she's been waiting, and I want to give it to her. So,
I don't understand where you. I believe this is in maybe your own fiction-driven world where you've concocted a scenario where somebody grew up, had their own experience, and then one day decided over time that, you know what, I'm actually going to identify with this race, and for some reason there's a good reason behind that doesn't have to do with, I don't know,
I can give you my own
mental illness or fetishizing another culture, that instead of just appreciating they feel like they need to outwardly represent as it. And so instead of pushing forward for a society in which race doesn't fucking matter, we're taking a detour all the way into the direction where race matters so fucking much that we want to co-sign on people just choosing a new one.
Okay, so I want to jump in here because I have an excellent kind of an example, and I'm curious, Cherry, what your thoughts would be, because I'm kind of like Kobe, where I'm not I'm not sure where I
You're-
stand on this.
You're scared to be offended by transracialism. It's okay.
Well, let me pose this question. I'm curious as how you'll respond. Black parents in a black community, they adopt a white kid, and they raise this white kid in the black culture, in their culture. He lives with them. He identifies. He goes to school. He has a lot of the same experiences as that of this culture. He grows up in a certain way, feeling
What
a certain way, being
experience?
connected to a different certain way. Than someone born in a white family would.
No, but you have to.
You recognize
you
the
have to
difference, though, that
qualify
there's a
this more.
difference between being
Listen,
raised
I
in a
don't
white family
recognize a difference
and
because
being
I know.
raised in a black family. You don't think
No.
there's any difference that
Well, okay,
an
so
experience.
maybe
Are you talking about like a ghetto experience? Do you think that there are not like successful black people living in the suburbs? Like,
Of course there are.
Well, no.
course,
I
don't
think
black
one
experience-
thing I could say, is that maybe like let's say, as a black person, you're aware of like how your siblings or how your family members will be treated in certain situations that would be different from other people, right? So maybe that's something that person would share. Maybe they don't share that for themselves because they don't, they're going to be treated not differently. But what would you say to that one? I guess.
Well, just to kind of finish it, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but he goes out into the world and he sees that he, like Stardust has said, he is treated different than his family is, and so because of this disconnect, this really bothersome disconnect, he decides that he wants to be more identified by society. He wants to be recognized by society as to be something more that he feels he is, and so he makes changes in order to be clocked by society as a race that he was not born as. Is there anything inherently morally wrong with that?
Okay, I have to get in here. I have to get in
Okay,
here.
go
This
ahead.
touches on something that Jangles said earlier that I think is incorrect. So Jangles said something along the lines of like identification is a form of differentiation, right? And this is just kind of obviously incorrect. Like identity is lining yourself
I'll
up
look
with.
at that. Like, no,
Like the
identity.
identity means like to identify with something. It's a kind of confirmation that you have with like other kind of things that are
As
socially
opposed to
construed.
what?
And that's not wrong, but
No,
that is how that
Oh
works.
no! I can't. It's like
Right?
no, I'm correct and you're incorrect. If you
No, I know you're wrong about that. Like because
Wait.
what
I'm
you
right.
are isn't
Guys.
concrete, and when you make it concrete, you are conforming to something that is made up
Why would you
out of,
have
like,
an
a social
identity
space.
without any? Why would you have an identity without something that is different from that identity? What is the purpose of that identity?
The fact that some identities are different amongst a group does not mean that to identify with something itself is to conform with that meaning that's socially construed. That's what that means.
The very purpose of an identity is differentiation. Why would you identify with anything
on.
if it wasn't
But-
in opposition to something
You know,
else?
this
What,
is-
what do you mean?
I'm sorry, I'm
to
just
identify
correcting
is
you.
like A equals
I'm
A. What the
just
fuck are you
correcting
talking
you.
about, man?
You're just
Identifying
correcting
is a
you.
confirmation.
Differences here, then why would
That's
you
what is
allow
correct
someone to
here.
just change?
No. That's just like I mean, you're kind of obviously semantically wrong about what the word means, but my point is to respond to Wick as well, right? Because I mean, no, like
maybe-
look, like hey,
maybe you can
I identify as
elaborate
a
a
man.
bit.
It's to
Hold on,
conform
I
with
need to
that
ask
role.
it. I need to ask
It's
it.
not to differentiate. I mean, it differentiates me from other
I need
possibilities.
to ask this.
But that's
Okay,
not the
okay.
essential
No,
character
I
of
need to ask this
identity.
because you're so. I don't want to be.
No,
rude.
this is totally right, dude. You're
No,
fucking
it's
wrong.
so fucking
Okay,
stupid.
I'm losing how
Like,
this
would you
discussion
identify
is
as
The
white?
meaning of the
Hold on,
word
would you
identity
identify
is
as
the
white?
opposite of differentiation.
Hold
It's
on,
to
how would
identify
you
with
identify
something.
as white with there's no other races? How would you identify as white if there were no other races?
So
If you
are
want
you
whatever
almost saying,
white
like,
meant,
identity
it is
important and
exactly
people
what I
should
was.
No!
That's what identity is. That's what the fucking word means. Are you fucking?
Okay,
I don't.
Holy
Wait,
shit,
wait,
I'm
guys.
fucking
We're getting
losing my
spicy
mind.
over the part
This
that's
is
not
just-
even spicy. Okay.
What the fuck? This is just like
No,
Guys.
guys.
Stupid. I can't believe
This
that
is
we're
so
having-
dumb. What the fuck?
Hang on,
I
guys.
agree.
This is
with
not
you.
even about transracialism. This is just like fucking how words.
Yeah,
work.
this is how words work. Words work via
A equals A.
differentiation.
That's what identity is. You dumb fuck. It's not about differentiation.
Oh my
It's
god!
opposite.
Don't call him a dumb. Don't call him a dumb fuck,
Holy shit.
please.
No, we'll move
I
past this.
would love
I'm
to
so
know
Okay,
about
this
obviously
is not
correct.
about transracialism.
Yeah,
This is
no,
not about
I'm
transracialism.
so obviously correct that we have.
No, okay, buddy. But like, here's the thing. What Wick is talking about is like, oh, I have like this internal experience. Like, there's nothing invalid about that person. I don't think there's anything immoral about like that impetus that person feels about wanting to like be better accepted. But the way that we engage with race and gender are very different. Whereas like the way we engage with gender is something that is very much construed by about how somebody presents, how they perform, all these different kind of things that go into like that signal to somebody what your gender is. And the way we engage with race is different, right? The way we engage with race is we look at things that are not necessarily reflective of people's self-presentations. We look at things that unfortunately they can't control, things about them that they don't have any control over. And that's not to make an essentialistic argument, but these are just kind of the variant things that we have that are piled into the content of the concept.
If I can ask a clarification question, you said something interesting there, and I really want to try to understand it. You said that we do not, and I'm trying to remember the exact words you used, but basically that we as a society do not identify race by how someone presents themselves, and I would say that's wrong. I would say that we can. That's really how people operate. They look at someone and they assume that person is this race. They may assume wrong. They may be totally wrong in their assumption, but they'll clock someone as a certain race, and
they
the way that they treat them, the way that they treat them will, because of implicit or explicit bias, be different than the way they would treat someone.
That was like a quick clarification. So my point, Wick, is to say that like the way you clock somebody for the race versus like their gender, it's like one of those is more of an active presentation that somebody is taking up than the other one. Like how we're making that judgment call, right? That's how we use these that's how we engage with these different social constructs in reality, right? So it's like that I'm not making an active presentation of being white, but I am making an active presentation of being a male.
Would you say that more of the signifiers that we look for when we're clocking that when it comes to gender, more of these have more of a voluntary nature than when it comes to it's the opposite for whiteness, or like race, that it's like you kind of just have these immutable characteristics and then people just apply it onto you kind of thing?
I think so. Can you like one more time? Give me that another.
Yeah. So just because I'm trying to work it through in my head as well, which is that when the signifiers we look for when we look at individual, when we're talking about gender, many of these things are like choices we make, the way that we present ourselves. While race, it's the opposite. It's just things that happen to be about ourselves, our skin tone, et cetera, that people then label onto us.
I wouldn't make it strict, right? So it's like these things are very very fluid because they're kind of social categories. Yeah. But like if you think of like the bucket of things that we make up to make someone like a woman as we encounter them, like, oh, that's a woman, those things are much more actively presented by that agent, whereas the things are like, oh, that's a white dude, or like I shouldn't say dude, white person, then like there's much less active participation in filling that bucket. That makes a lot
of sense.
I think Cherry wanted to come in here, so yeah.
Can I respond to Wick's thing about like the child
Please, yes.
adopted, parents are black, child is white? Do I think that they should be able to grow up one day when they understand what any of you are trying to describe as transracialism and get to outwardly identify as black? Be it even if they get cosmetic surgery and do a damn good job of pulling off, the black aesthetic. No, because their experience is different, and I understand there's not really a word for it right now. Not many people are talking about it, right? I think more people talk about like the biracial experience growing up more than they do the adopted experience, or let's say even the white experience that doesn't come with privilege, like your regular schmegular Eminem 8 Mile trailer park trash white person. Like they have a different experience too, and maybe it's like a little bit easier for you if you get to just like become black because you think that is actually closer to the experience that you've had, but it's not your experience, and you're struggling, and I understand, but I don't know, make a voice, like speak up. What is your specific experience? Talk about what it's like to be white but see your parents get discriminated. It's not the same experience as being a black child and seeing your parents get discriminated. It's a different fucking experience, so make your own fucking word.
Well, we have to differentiate between like categories and identities versus individual experiences, right?
Let know nothing talk. Okay. I love
yeah. We
unless you force him, he has the best takes.
Yeah. I did. I wanted to hear because it looked like he wanted to say something. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I can exactly address what Cherry just said, but I think one part that we kind of touched upon, but I don't think have stressed enough yet, is just like the social construct aspect of race, and not just that it's like a set social construct, but that it's between societies in present modern day. Different societies you can move to and live in are going to see you as a different race. So you could have an almost transracial experience just from moving from one country to another, in a sense, where in one country you're not seen as white, and then you move to America where we have a different way of looking at race, and you're seen as white, and that is almost a transracial experience in a sense.
Should we
I'd
move to
argue.
the second topic?
Are we just gonna circle jerk around definitions all the time and social constructs and never actually
it's
talk
very
about
important.
the topic? Because you said you're not sure if you can like touch what I talked about, because I give you like a really fucking a real experience and maybe really real things to challenge your idea here, which would be accepting of transracialism, and maybe you'd have to shut it down, and then maybe you'd have to be against transracialism. But I think you just want to be like all the way woke, and so we're just gonna circle jerk around like the definition of a social construct this whole
So
time.
I do have a
Let's,
question for you,
Well, okay.
Cherry. Are you familiar with ADOS at all?
It depends, because if you
Okay,
Google
American
it, it's
Descendants of
autism.
Slaves.
Okay, so okay, descendants of slaves.
To be fair to Know Nothing, I forced him to talk, so I don't think it was. I don't think it was
and
that.
I wanted him to respond to me, and he didn't want to. So I'm gonna bully
I'd be
him.
happy
Well,
to.
I'll engage with you, Cherry. I'll take it. I'll talk about this. It's a fraught topic. There's a lot here, but yeah, I'll take one for the team and kind of try to address your point. It's not a bad point. It's a great point, but I think there has to be a discussion about that, because the reason I bring up ADOS, for example, is from what I've read is they're a specific identity among the Black community that would that are advocating in many cases for reparations specifically for their identity to the exclusion of other Black identities. So they have kind of staked out a little location and said in a very real way, our experience as Black is different than your experience as Black, and we do not accept your experience as Black as the same as our experience as Black.
Yes, and there's also a lot of racism rooted in ADOS circles, as
Yes.
like, you know, excluding certain people from even identifying as Black and belittling their experiences. Yeah, that's I don't know. That's racism. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. The reason I bring it up is because, like, I guess I would ask, what is your definition of what it means to be Black in America?
My definition is, will people look at you and assume that you're Black and treat you different for it?
Okay.
Wait, what'd you say then? I'm just wondering. I'm not trying to get you. If there's a person that was mixed race that legitimately just wasn't clocked like anybody is, like, would you say that person's white? If they have like a one Black parent, one white parent, and they just happen to be clocked by like 99% of people as white?
If you have a Black parent, then you're Black.
Okay, so ancestry does have
Yes, go ahead. Know Nothing.
Yeah, so now I'm just a bit confused by Cherry's definition, because at first it sounded like you were saying that you're Black based on how society perceives you and treats you. Like if the average person is going to treat you as Black, that makes you Black. And now I feel like you're adding a bit to it, where now even if you're not treated as Black, everyone sees you as white. If you have some Black ancestry, then you still have the Blackness in you, and you'd still be called Black. Like,
So here's the difficult part, because when Kobe says that, I just assume that it's Kobe who would look at the person and assume that they're white. There are people who will look at me and assume that I'm white, but then there are people who will look at me and assume that I'm Black. So when he says that one of the parents is Black, I kind of already fill in the blanks, like, okay, Kobe's probably just pegging them as white. Like, I don't know. Some people are very selective with how they are going to identify you and treat you, depending what side that they're on, you know? Like, in a lot of Black communities, I'll be pegged as a white person. But if I go into white communities, I'm fucking Black.
That points to like the racial construct idea, right?
I'm a little like confused as well. Like, so the hypothetical I set up was that like 99% of people, like, it is not a Black-white thing. It's just across the board. Would you say that if across the board a person has mixed race parents, is identified as one or the other, that's just one that they have to kind of identify with? I'm not trying to get you. I don't know the answer to that either. I think it's like a fungible concept.
I don't know anybody who 99% of the world will perceive as white, even though they are half Black.
So I guess that's a key here is, are we do we get to choose our own identity, and at what point does society's constraint on that choice come into play? And I think that's a really interesting topic, because obviously there are certain places where, you know, in my view, and this is just my personal take, is that you can identify as whatever you like, but there are lines where society can draw and say, you may identify as that, but we do not have to treat you as that. And obviously there's some really obvious examples out there, like if I identified as the president of the United States, I could do that all day long, but as soon as I start demanding that society treat me as a president of the United States, society has the right to say, no, you're fucking not. That's dumb. And I think that when it comes to transracialism, because of the immutable characteristics that are used to clock people as members of certain races, that this topic kind of goes into that area of at what point does society have the right to say, oh, you're not white or you are white, or you're not black or you are black? At what point does society get to choose that rather than the individual get to choose that? And I don't know the answer.
I don't think it's a dichotomous
always
answer.
society
Wait,
choose
other
it?
people have their
Oh,
hands.
go ahead.
Sorry.
So I just wanted to, I think Sherry's right, but I understand that it can be kind of frustrating when you ask somebody for a definition, and it's the first thing is like, oh, well, somebody pegs me as being black, and it's like, okay, but then it's also ancestry matters. But this is actually the right way to think about how terms like your racial identity, or that those things don't actually have definitions in the way that we tend to think of them as like a certain kind of amount of criteria that you have to fit, and it excludes all the other things and captures all the, like, that's not really how these things work. Like these categories that we have socially constituted in this way, like the sense of, oh, well, somebody pegs me as being black and they treat me differently, that's a really good way to capture, generally speaking, what we mean by blackness. And then having ancestry, that's like one thing amongst like a whole bag of things that we think about when we pick somebody for being black. And there's not an essential set of criterion that we use, because these kinds of constructs are generally very ambiguous, right? So there's a different way to think about it rather than the kind of the typical like dictionary definition with bullet points of the criteria you got to meet. But it's still a good, healthy way, I think, to use the term. So I would very much defend that definition.
The positions that both you, RJ, and Cherry bring up are definitely very much taking some of these conclusions I came in here with. Here'd be my question. We can all agree here that there's this bag of things that we use, and some of them are extrinsic, some of them are extrinsic. I think what we're getting at here is that for some individuals, they kind of ride the line, right? Where it's like it's kind of complicated to say who actually, who makes the determination. And I think that, like I was saying at the beginning of my statement, that's who I think transracialism speaks to. I think a lot of the problems, like comparing it to gender, the term transracialism, are really problematic. But that's what I think it's speaking to, which is true, which is that there are people that sit in an interesting periphery of these racial identifications that have a hard time going with, going with the rules we have to set up. So sorry for butting in.
No, I think that points to like a really interesting, like, what we're talking about here, because identity is, I don't want to bring that up again. Like, it is a play between like what you personally feel and what society feels, and it's always contextual. Your identity does not have to be set in stone for it to be authentic. It's always contextual. So for example, like what you personally feel about your own gender identity in the comfort of your own home, that's what's most important in that time. That is what is the most true. But let's say like so an example I like to bring up is like if if a Sikh person is attacked for an anti-Muslim hate crime. That Sikh person is not Muslim, but their identity was assumed to be Muslim. And in that instance, of a hate crime, their identity being ascribed to them by an external force, that was what was most important in that context. And obviously, that's an extreme example, but identity is always an interplay between your own personal feelings and how you interact with society, and how society interacts with you. I don't know if it's like, are we trying to get at what is the true identity? Like, I think that's what the biggest thing about transracialism is. Like, what is the true identity? And my answer would be like, there is no true identity. It's always contextual. It's always based on like a bunch of different factors that are heavily like dependent on what context you're in.
I do want to hear from Zonia because she's been waiting for a while. So.
Yeah, I came into this kind of late, and I was trying to wrap my head around what was being discussed. But the topic, if I'm correct, is identity something that can be, in this case, racial identity, is that something that can be chosen, or does it have to do with lived experience? And I feel like we're kind of dancing around a lot of semantics that are not quite bringing us to that, to that question. So obviously people brought up some good points. Jengles brought up the point that I was also making, that your identity is oftentimes, as you leave your home, your identity is sort of placed upon you by those who perceive you, right? And suddenly things change. I think what we need to start kind of break down is, this is difficult to word without getting into yikesy territory, but like, where are the problems, right? Obviously, there is the argument that we have someone who effectively dons the costume of being a person of a different skin color than they actually are, can take that costume off to remove themselves from the lived experience, right? So whereas someone, for instance, who is a black person in America, they can't do that, you know? They can't just take off, quote, a costume, so they don't have to deal with certain types of racial biases and harassment all the time. But then there's also the concept of, is it actually doing harm? Is there a problem with it, right? Should we be chastising people who decide to choose their racial identity, or should we just be allowing it? And that would bring up another question, is like, is this essentializing people's skin color in that case, right? So then I would break that one down and talk about that a bit. And I think in many ways, I can't speak for people who are darker skin color. Obviously, I'm white. But I could imagine that it would probably feel like cheapening and sort of propping up my skin color if I were having to face that and somebody was racially identifying as what I am, and I've gone through a lifetime of various types of discrimination and difficulties based on my skin color that I couldn't do anything about. So maybe we need to kind of break down those things, like, does it do harm? You know, where are the issues with it? Should we be like speaking out against people who try to identify as a race other than what they are? That's where I'd like to kind of take it, if we can wrap up the question.
That's a good point, because that would be the next question on the list. So good job, Sonia. Wow.
I do have kind of an addendum to add on to that, if I might. At what point is it harmful to, and this is a loaded term, I'm not meaning it in a loaded way, so just bear with me. At what point is it harmful to gatekeep someone's racial identity based on how society reacts to them? Is that all we're going to use as a keystone to someone's racial identity, is how society treats them and their quote unquote lived experience? At what point does that become harmful? If you as an ethnic group are defining yourselves primarily based on how other ethnic groups treat you, is that useful? I don't know.
I think this is all ludicrous. And I blame society for it. I think that we are in a culture where, not culture, I'm sorry. We're in a place where if you just appreciate someone else's culture, if you appreciate other communities' fashion and, let's say, dancing and art and stuff like that, you're labeled as cultural appropriation. There are some white girls on Twitter who are twerking that are being called culturally appropriating. That's ridiculous. Anybody can shake their ass. We are all welcome. Anyone can wear French braids. Anyone can wear bandeau knots. Guess what? Other people can get pigment on their skin. Sicilian bitches, they do fucking tan. They do be tanning. And these things are okay. I 100%, I'm on board with sharing the culture, sharing the love, sharing the aesthetics. But when you do it and then decide everyone needs to receive you as being Brazilian now, or everyone needs to receive you as being black or being Korean, like, that is a problem. Everything before that is fine. Why do you then have to force society to mark you as something different? Like,
can you explain why it's a problem, though? Just for argument's sake.
Okay, because we've decided that you are Brazilian when you're born from Brazil. And you getting tan and then deciding you want society to view you as Brazilian is crazy.
I really
What's
liked
the
your
harm, though?
I really liked your
That's-
argumentation, but a lot of the problems in that argumentation is essentializing someone based on their race and where they grew up. Like I think most of us would agree that if someone based on that definition, and I know that this isn't as simple as you would make it out to be, but if someone was born in Brazil and at the age of 4 they moved to Wisconsin and then they lived for 30 years in Wisconsin, if we had the reverse of that, someone who was born in Wisconsin and then lived 30 years in Brazil, the second person is more Brazilian. I think we would all agree with that, correct?
No, you're still.
And that's conflating like ethnicity with culture with race, which a lot of people do, which is why the conversation is so tough.
I don't want to
definitions
slip
are hard.
away from this though. I want to ask Cherry, like, what is the harm? You say it's crazy, but the thing is, no. Here's the thing. Now, personally, I'm leaning more against transracialism, but what I want to call out is that lots of people have used that same argument against trans women to say you can't identify as a woman. That's crazy, right? So I want to kind of know, like, what is the fundamental problem there? Like, what is the harm?
That's where I find it so unfair that just because like trans is in the title, that somehow being transracial, you get all of the tried and true and the like proved stories from transgender identity. We have none of that for transracially. All of our examples for people who needed to be identified as transracial come from Rachel Dolezal, who wanted to just be the new CEO of BLM, and then fucking Ollie London with 18 botched plastic surgeries, who decided, actually, I'm Korean. And honestly, that should be offensive, okay? Korean people are beautiful. They do not look like 18 consecutive botched plastic surgeries. So I would say that up until maybe they have even just a drop of the actual stories and the evidence of good faith in wanting to transition, that they don't get to just hide behind the shield of transgender rights and stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I can answer
But-
directly to you, Zonia. Is that cool?
Yeah, I'm just sort of wanting to. I feel like we should have a more concrete, like, here is demonstrated harm, and I agree with your
I was muted.
what's her name, London guy who, did the whole 20 different surgeries to look like he's Korean, right? To look like Jimin specifically. But I agree with that. I just want I want us to have a solid argument that can't be used to then transplant transgender into, right?
Oh,
And
to be
that's
clear,
what I'm trying to get around to.
To be clear, the biggest difference between transracialism and being transgender is because there's a mountain of evidence, historical evidence, to say that gender dysphoria is a real medically diagnosed condition with not only like a lot of stories held behind it, but also like a lot of neurological research. There's a lot of scientific evidence supporting gender dysphoria and the act of identifying as being trans. There's a ton of evidence. If anyone says there's not, they're lying. There's a ton of scientific evidence supporting like transgender people, and the biggest difference there is that like for transracialism, there's really not that, because it is different. It's different neurologically. There's no like biological drive to like association with gender or sexuality or anything like that. There's nothing there for transracialism. The interesting part, at least for me, for this conversation, is the concepts of identity, the concepts of the social constructs of those identities. For me, that's what's interesting here, and that's why, like, if anyone says that we're like avoiding the issue of transracialism, to me, like, well, transracialism it's more about those discussions. It's more about the discussions of identity and what it means to actually be a thing, the truth behind identity. For me, for this discussion, that's what I'm going into it. So
Don't you feel like, as a thought experiment, you're kind of like, when you just embolden people who are even considering for transracialism, and you justify ways in which they could do it and that society would be forced to accept it, aren't you just doing like the rape sympathizer shit? Like, you don't
What
even
the
know
fuck?
if this is a problem yet, and you're
No,
just
I'm sorry.
coming out
What
as
the
simple
fuck?
for transracial
no,
people.
wait, hold on. Good
Wait.
faith just like dropped to the floor.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Little.
I'm saying
Over the
that there
top.
are people, we don't know if they're good faith. The only examples that we have are absolute bad faith. But for your thought experiment, you want to find good reasons for why people can do it. So, I mean,
Can I
that's
just
fine.
jump in here? Because I've been waiting
just-
to get in. I have like a good direct answer to Zonia's
Hurry up,
question about
RJ. I
harms.
want in too.
Yeah. Okay. You can wait a little bit. Okay. So I'm gonna ignore everything that just happened up here in the other corner. Okay, so Zonia, the harms. I don't. I think Jangles makes an interesting point, but I don't actually think where I'm going to come from has much to do with like the experience of gender dysphoria and the evidence for it. Not to dismiss it, but like I think the actual harm comes from the fact that the situation that we're in, like the matter-of-fact situation we're in now, is that most cases of like attempted transracialism are likely tantamount to inauthentic claims of being transgender. So it's like there's like this panic that people do, like oh, what if like someone's going to pretend to be a girl to get into the girls' washroom, right? It's like this is something that's used to be very dismissive of transgender people, and it's very harmful, like this kind of thing going on. And I think with transracialism, we're facing mostly cases where people are actually kind of doing something like that. And then so like that's one case, right? So we want to be careful about the harms of people who are just like kind of taking advantage of like a trans identity that they don't authentically hold for malicious ends. And then there's the authentic side of it, where it's like if somebody has a genuine authentic experience where they identify as transracial, the harm from that comes from the mere fact that you can't have a transracial identity because that's not what those things mean. The meaning of race in our society and the meaning of gender in our society are different in such a way that you can't actually transition race, but you can transition gender, right? So so like the harm comes from because you can't do that, somebody who is attempting to do that, even with their authentic kind of internal experience, because it's not dependent on internal experience, you're going to end up doing something that's more analogous to the first kind of harm.
But RJ, that's not true. That's not true. There are definitely things that you could do to make yourself appear to be a different race. You can.
Martina Big.
Yeah.
No. I'm not saying you can't do anything to appear to be a different race, but like as a matter of fact, we don't treat those people as different races.
If I can't tell the difference,
if you pass.
Yeah, if you pass, as Sonia says, it's all about passing. If I cannot tell the difference, I won't treat them differently.
It's not all about passing. But it's actually not all about passing, though. That's the thing.
Let me jump in on this really quickly. The problem is that a lot of arguments you're using we can swap in or out, transgender, right? And so one of the things that I want to be cautious about, if we argue against transracialism, are we using the same argument that is used to argue against transgender, right?
In a transmedical sense, right?
So, and a lot of people do it. Now, what I would do when I would want to argue for my own being a woman, right? I argue it as the world that I was given and the role that I was given and the label that I was given are incompatible with the way that I function, right? So I don't address the world in what we typically consider to be a masculine sense. And I don't address my surroundings in that manner. And I tend to identify things in what we would traditionally refer to as a more feminine sense. But we need to be cautious about how we're arguing for these things. So if we say, for instance, that, a lot of the arguments have been that, being transracial, it is, you can't change a race. Well, people said the same thing about gender, and now we're, starting to be more comfortable with that. We're using these arguments that have traditionally been used to argue against being transgender. So I want us to come up with more foundational arguments that don't.
No, okay, so I have to respond to this because it's exactly my central point, right? So my central point is we're not going to come up with more foundational arguments. That's kind of the wrong way to go with these, because these kind of things, like race and gender, what these things actually are, they don't lend themselves to having foundational arguments, because the foundational arguments are the essentialist argument, right?
And then why would we gatekeep race?
But here's the thing, right? Because there's I really like what Jangle said earlier. This is all part of the same.
Sorry, Jerry.
It's one thing. It's one thing. I'm trying to put it all together as fast as I can. But like Jangles mentioned, how these things are contextual, right? There's a matter of fact that like our intersubjective understanding, if you guys read the papers, is a certain way about race and it is a certain way about gender, and they're different, right? So that's why you can do one and not the other. But there's no more foundational aspect of it.
Okay.
Cherry.
Now, listen, I understand the desire to get defensive when somebody says you can't transition. That's crazy. But these two things do not have to relate, and I feel like the reaction that you get is very normal, but it's the same reaction that like a white person gets when they defend somebody who says something, when they defend like another white person who said something who can be perceived as racist. You're like, hold on, I'm white, I'm not racist, so I'm gonna try to justify what the fuck that person said and maybe like sugarcoat it because I just have like guilt for being white or something. Like, just, I would hope that if you are transgendered, allow for the conversation around transracialism to happen outside of gender identity.
That's
Well,
a
no,
good.
this is my
no,
position
nothing.
on it, though.
Okay.
What I want to say is that I'm trying to not hand arguments over to people who would argue against us, is what I'm trying to say. So if I sit here and if I defend an argument against transracial or transitioning between race that is easily the component can be removed, you can remove race and you can plug in gender, I don't want to support that argument, right?
Yeah,
So
but the thing is, those two things shouldn't be like
They
like,
shouldn't be.
pluggable.
They
But
shouldn't
no,
be, but the reality of it.
Support somebody doing that.
But they fit anyway. So the
Yeah.
same argument is
So-
used regardless. So we need to be a little bit more foundational argument. For instance, what I would argue if I were going to argue against being transracial, I would say that someone putting on the skin of another race who doesn't have the lived experience is not only essentializing the race of those people, but also cheapening it and turning it into a costume where they can put the costume on, and if they run into lived experience issues that same group of people would have, they can easily take it off again and don't have to be forced into it. So I'd use some kind of an argument more like that, or something.
But that's also an argument that could be used against gender identity for people who don't go all the way to surgery, correct?
Which is what a lot of trans med people say. So I'm also cautious about using that as well.
So I think that we would do better for each other if we just agree gender and race cannot be interchangeable in these arguments.
But
Yeah,
you
go
have
ahead
to
and,
show
no,
the reason
nothing.
why.
Wait, no, nothing's been
Right.
waiting, and I want to give him a chance to say something. So,
Yeah, like my response to that really is like, yeah, in our woke left-wing space, we can all agree, oh yeah, let's not touch this race thing. Gender is different. But the problem is these arguments exist outside of us. Like someone like Ben Shapiro he doesn't care what we say, is going to say, oh, why do all these arguments against transracialism also go against transgenderism? And we need to be able to
Shapiro
rebut
also
that.
doesn't give a fuck about facts. Like,
What?
Doesn't
he
matter.
also
The point
doesn't
is, if
care
the
about facts. No
argument
matter
you're
what you
making-
do, he's gonna find a way to be a dumb fuck.
Well, I mean,
Well,
we all
I-
agree.
You don't want his arguments to be good. You want to have rebuttals to every argument conservatives are saying.
We all
And
agree
if
on the
your
fact.
argument
Well,
against
we certainly don't want to be.
transracialism can be used perfectly the same way against transgenderism, that is what conservatives are going to be doing. So
I mean,
it would be
if
much
they-
better to have an
if-
argument that can't be used on both.
Well,
If
I was
they
supposed to-
wanted to, they could just take this VOD and whatever we agree to, they can kind of just say, look at that. This is how they argue against transracialism, but this is our same argument against transgender, right? So we kind of need to be a little bit more responsible with it because we are creating firepower that can be used to do harm to the community. And so we need to have better, more foundational arguments against this, or we need to admit that we can't argue against it without also arguing against myself, for instance.
all I wanted
Go
to
ahead,
say
Kobe.
was that, yeah, well, is that it seems like all of us actually do agree on the facts. There doesn't seem to be any factual evidence that there is like people that are in like massive distress because of transracialism, but that is not the case for transgender people. It does seem to be there's copious evidence of the treatment transgender people, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems that we agree there. It does seem to be like the rhetorical disagreement. I've been swayed, I think, in some respects by both what was brought up by RJ, the idea of like there's a bag of characteristics on race. It just seems like more of it is extrinsic. And on Cherry, something you brought up earlier on your panel or the thing you were talking about last night, and on this, I actually think that what you're bringing up here, this idea of stopping so much stigmatization of like cultural appropriation, is probably like the solution to this, like the cultural outlet that allows these people that sit on peripheries of culture to express themselves, to, I think the word you use, like participate in that shared joy without necessarily needing to claim the identity. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Well, the point that I'd make though is that I think that we do need to recognize that we can levy a lot better arguments against some of these transracial arguments than are being levied. Just saying I think, I don't want to repeat what Zonia said, but like that'd be where I guess I'd put it. Like if we're going to say that you can't identify as transracial because a society is not going to clock you like that, well, how do we talk about non-binary people? Most non-binary people, will get clocked one way or the other. Do they not? We would all agree, I would hope they don't count. But on the same, but kind of to no things point. I understand theoretically they're different, but in real society, I think that there's going to be a bit more fungibility.
Okay, we keep saying that there's no real evidence that transracial or that people are facing real discomfort based on their racial identity. And I think that's not true. I think
Not
that
in a way that is analogous to gender dysphoria. That could be true, but it
It
wouldn't be
could
analogous
change.
to gender dysphoria.
well,
It could
my
change as
point
time
here.
goes on and more people come out.
Yeah, my point here is
could,
that
but it's
We used to,
current.
you know,
there's a
20 years
stigma.
ago, we said the same thing about trans people, by the way.
Indeed, and also again when we look at the adoption thing, there's stories out there, there's research that's been done on this, where people who are adopted into other cultures and other races, they face real cognitive issues with how they identify, and I think that allowing them, at least exploring the idea of allowing them space to be identified as a race they're more comfortable with is not outside of the realm of possibility. I think in those cases, it would not do the harm that I think it would in something like someone's just like Ollie London did, or
So I
or
can
other
explain this. I can explain this as best I can here. So I'm sympathetic to transracialism for a number of reasons. Mostly how they're like the concept of the questions being asked in this discussion. I think they're really interesting. I think those are great. But there is a difference. Like there is a genetic component to gender identity that is related in some small part to sexuality. Like in order to have a sexuality, you have to have a concept of who you are, what your gender is, what your sex is, and how that relates to the other, like the sex that is going to make the babies. All right. So I know that's drastically simplifying things, but there's a biological, like genetic basis for why someone might have a certain gender identity that does not align with their sex assigned at birth. So there's impetus there, and that is different, and it's not more valid. It's not more important. It doesn't mean it matters more. That is different than the discomfort that someone, let's say a white kid who is born into a black family or vice versa. That's different than that because all of that is socially imposed. All of it. None of it's genetically imposed. It's just like, I look different than my parents. I look different than the people around me. That's all of that is socially imposed, which is not to say it's less important, but that it does mean that there's a scientific basis for why these two things are distinct. Now, there's a great. I thought Cherry said something incredible, like the cultural appropriation. I think cultural appropriation is the dumbest issue that the left cares about. Like, if you like a thing, you should do the thing. There are instances where it's disrespectful, like if you're like taking like someone's like deeply held culture as a costume, that's shitty. But if you just like a thing and you want to adopt that thing because you like it, fuck yeah, do that. I think that is one of the best things that we can do to like bridge the divide here. If you disagree with that, I'll take my firm stance on that. But yeah, like there's a difference, but the more interesting aspects are like, what does it mean when the lines are more blurry? Like if someone is a quarter black, can they identify as black? Can they identify as white? Or do they have to identify as mixed? Or like, and you see like you have to like have the categories like given to you by your society. Or does that matter more or less than what you personally identify as? And what is more true, which I think is the real question we're getting at here.
Yeah, and I think you hit upon it, and just to kind of reframe it, if I may, just really quickly, is that when it comes to gender issues, we, as at least on the left, seem to say that the person gets to choose, whereas in race issues, we say society gets to choose, that a person has no choice in this. And again, as we're talking, as these are things that are socially constructed, it makes it hard for me to square, you know what I mean? Because as Zonia keeps saying, a lot of these same arguments against transracialism, you can just switch the words and they apply on a one-to-one basis. So why do we not let people have more autonomy when it comes to choosing their racial identity?
I feel like in the race for progress, we are going in opposite directions. Like where I would like to go to the point where race doesn't fucking matter. You would like to go in the opposite direction where race starts to matter so much that people get to change their race.
Wait,
Well, to
Wouldn't
be
that be
very
a-
clear,
yeah.
I'm very colorblind in my outlook, and I would like more colorblind solutions and things like that. But when it comes to this specific issue, I think that when it comes to because this is
God,
an individual
dude.
problem.
I
Why'd
find
you
it-
say it like
One
that?
problem, actually.
I find it very
don't-
interesting.
Definitely don't say it like that.
Oh,
but
I was just saying, like, Cherry,
I
I find
agree
that
with Cherry that we need to go in the direction of, moving away from essentializing race so much. The whole colorblind thing, I'm not going to back that up, but we should be moving away from essentializing race so much. I totally agree with that, and that probably is
That's a colorblind thing, by the way. Just
no, it isn't. But I think it is probably the best argument against transracials, like supporting being transracial, and that's kind of where I was getting at, is that it's sort of essentializing people's race so much more when someone is transitioning their race, so to speak. So, and that's kind of the direction I was going. So, Cherry, I fully support what you're saying there. I do think we need to move away from that, and I think that's sort of the path we should go down to discuss this.
Real quick, I have a
Colby.
question for Wick. Is Zonia's dress red or is it green?
it's definitely
peach.
red.
It's peach, but the lights are kind of making it look sort of
Swear to
orange.
God, if this
By
is
the
one of
way,
those like,
beautiful,
questions, I'm gonna
beautiful.
freak out.
I wanted to I
Appropriating the hell
considered
out of your culture.
no, dude, go ahead and appropriate. I was considering dressing up, but then I chickened out. So sorry.
I figured it would be a good thing to sort of bounce off of at some point.
If one of
once
you
we start
says
going
that dress is like black and gold or something, I will attack you.
Kobe had
I can't
something
deal,
to say.
I
I
can't
think.
deal with that.
yeah, I was just
Hey,
going to kind of like
it's
throw.
red, gold, and green. So
I was just going
it's
to throw
like
kind of
a
onto the.
Shut up,
Actually,
RJ.
I agree. I agree with this this idea of that. Like I do think that race is a race is a social concept has been like a pretty disastrous for the human race. I don't think it's really done anything good. We got a lot of bad outcomes. I think it'd be based if we could move to society where it doesn't exist. And initially, that is where that position brought me to a sympathetic position of transracialism, where I figure, oh, maybe these are going to help do away with these kind of erase these boundaries. But now that we're talking, I'm kind of moving to a little bit of the other side, which I do wonder. I remember reading one time talking about the idea that one correlation within societies that have racial animus, every time they do a census and they ask people to put down what their race is, it fuels racial animus in places like the Balkans, place like this, right? Because people have to self-identify and then they kind of think about it. Oh, okay, I'm a this, I'm not this, right? And I think that perhaps we could end up kind of, as Cherry is saying, going to the wrong direction, where we end up making people identify more with these racial groups. Racial animus becomes worse because people are choosing who they, choosing what side they're on.
So I've had 1,000 CRT debates because it's the only topic that any conservative wants to debate on. Like there's a there's a split between like color blindness. I think all of us would agree that if we didn't see race, that would be the best thing. That would be awesome. But there's a difference between like what is the ideal situation for society.
That's not
and
what
is the-
colorblindism is, but okay, go on.
Hold it, no, it is. Colorblind
It is not. It's like a conservative just tries to tell you what CRT is, and they're desperately wrong.
I'm about to tell you. I've had so many debates on this. I promise I know what I'm talking about. Jesus fucking
It's
Christ.
going to be very cursed if this turns into a CRT panel. I just got to. It's a very cursed.
Oh my
That was
God!
like-
Please let it
okay.
happen. That would be all of the spice.
Please, no!
Colorblind
Please,
is
let me
simply
finish.
the.
No, I can
Let me
explain
explain it to you really
No, I
quickly,
can explain it.
because I know
can
you don't
explain
know
it.
what you're talking
No,
about.
I know more.
I
know
100%
so
know
much
you
more
don't know
than
what
you.
you're talking
I know
about.
so much more than you. Please let me talk. Please let me talk before I drag
Hey,
myself.
you're starting off wrong. Like, take one.
I know,
wrong.
Just okay. I'm starting off absolutely correct. Colorblindness is if we did not view race as a salient factor in society. That's what colorblindness means. If you disagree with that, you're wrong.
That's not what
I don't
you
think he
said.
meant it
You
that
said
way.
that
Fuck
it's
it, you know
not
what?
the same color.
Okay.
That's
I
what
swear to
you
God,
said.
I swear to
Just
God, I
know-
will take myself.
just-
I will
Listen,
walk into the
just
sea.
know that
okay?
you are using terminally online lingo, and he's just using it in a different way. That doesn't
Okay,
mean
no, well, okay,
everything
well,
that you
one of
think
us is correct, and the correct one is me.
One of
He
them-
already
that's
got
on
upset
Twitter.
earlier by RJ saying he was incorrect. Now Wick is here.
I'm getting a
Jesus
sense that
Christ.
there's a lot of performative outrage about semantics
it's-
here. Like
it's
everybody
not-
knows
I-
exactly
if
what the
there-
fuck Wick is
it
talking
should-
about, man,
it
and you're
should
just
not-
freaking
it
out,
should not
dude.
be
Like, chill out.
performative. I am
Holy
correct.
shit.
I should
Oh,
not
yeah,
be correct.
you're correct. You're correct. Okay.
I
wrap
know.
up.
I'm
Wrap it
equally
up.
correct on
Wrap it
both
up.
of these. I cannot believe both of you disagree with this. Like, please go outside. All right. So, colorblind, as it is usually meant is that race is not a salient factor. All right, I've had 1,000 CRT debates. I've done so much fucking research.
I think the
That's why
wrong person needs
So
to It's you! You gotta go outside, my guy!
Yo, you
You're
debated
not
with a bunch of
wrong.
people on
For
Twitch
real,
and
holy
You're not
Twitter.
shit.
wrong, you're just right.
God
You're
damn.
in a little
Fucking,
tight
okay,
circle.
that means nothing. You
Yeah,
debated with
that's
a
great. Yeah, I
1,000
agree with
people
Jerry.
who
Like,
don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
we're not at like
I'm
the
just
University
saying.
of Washington sociology
the
department.
fact that you, okay, the
This
fact that
fucking-
you won't let me finish, like, shut the fuck
Okay,
up.
okay.
all right?
Everybody,
Let me finish.
let Jangles finish. Okay.
Let me tell you the correct take on this. All right. All right. I'll repeat it. I have to repeat it for a 5th time because I was interrupted. Okay. What people usually mean when they say colorblind is that race is not a salient factor in any aspect of how we interact in society. That is correct. All right. That is what conservatives will say that's what we should be doing. But that is not the reality that we experience. People are racist. People do make judgments based on your race. People do judge people because they're not white or black or Hispanic. They do make judgments on that race. And because of that, you're trying to judge like the reality of the current situation in society based on this like hypothetical perfect society you want to have. And that's why CRT is a thing. And that's why we fight about it. All right? Would you disagree with that?
Yes, 100%.
I'm gonna kill myself.
I'm raising my hand.
Cherry's
I'm gonna
here.
kill myself.
Let's hear what Cherry has to
in
say
Minecraft.
because she's raising her hand very aggressively. So.
I don't know if it's easy to tell. I am 31 years old, and all
I'm
of
also
my
31.
life, you're almost 31, so
I
sit down
am
and
31.
listen to your
I'm
elders.
38.
Okay.
I am 31. At
all-
your age, y'all are children.
Listen.
I'm 38 years
all
old.
my fucking life, colorblind has meant that people have an actual hard time maybe seeing the difference between the color red and the color green or something like that, or the color blue. Your use of the word colorblind is terminally online and in like the rooms of scholars, and I don't know if you know that you're on twitch.tv. The scholars are fucking here, my guy. So
I'm
you're the
gonna
one who
jump
needs
off
to
a
touch
bridge.
grass.
I cannot touch grass because I will
Let
be
me
in
link
the
you
sea.
to some
Yo, you
Harvard
clearly
presentation.
can't because you're having a fucking
I'll
breakdown.
link you to some actual
I'm
scholars on this,
absolutely.
as
I'm
opposed
having
to
a
debating,
breakdown live
debating
on
fucking
Twitch.
people who haven't graduated college. And I'll link you to some
I have a
actual
master's
literature
degree.
on this.
Oh my
Cool.
god.
Not in
Oh my
sociology.
god.
I'm so much smarter than you.
Performance arts?
Fucking hell! Why am I on a panel with these people?
You're the one who signed
going
on to
to
twitch.tv.
scream.
I'm helping
I
your
should
mental
sign off.
here,
I should
okay?
sign off forever.
What did I miss? Is there like a big old fight over Wick using the term?
It is. It
colorblind?
is. I've had 2
Colorblind,
fights, 2
yes.
screaming
Well,
fights.
first of all,
And
he
you
doesn't
don't
know
know
what the
just
fuck he's
wrong
talking about, so
basic
you need to
facts about
take your
the
master's
universe.
degree and turn it in, because obviously you need to get your money back, because that's trash, that your degree is
Wick,
trash,
you
because you don't know what you're talking about.
motherfucker.
I'm just
Like
letting you know.
38-year-old mother.
Right.
Colorblind means that contradicts my definition of it. And no, it needs to be the definition that most people use. All right, tell me what the definition is. And how
Those
it
are some,
contradicts what I
those are
said.
some fucking
You think most people
requirements.
have a master's degree in your
Okay,
fucking
yeah, those are some requirements. Give me a definition that most people use. I'm sorry to place those heavy burdens on you.
What most people
Listen,
use,
I'm not
you recognize
offended.
it. If
You're
most people say a
offended.
thing, it doesn't make it right, correct? Most people can say a thing, and it has no foundation of whether a thing or not is
Shit,
true,
do we need to,
is
like, teach
accurate,
people what social
is used
constructs
in
mean?
academia, and things like that. So that requirement is nonsense. I do not need to use the definition as most people use it if I am instead using it correctly.
Please, okay, correctly. Jesus Christ. All right, so if you have the correct definition is whatever narrow academic usage it is. That's the correct
I'll
definition,
I'll
right?
link you to some videos. You can research it on yourself.
I
don't
can
want to-
research it. I can research if I want to be incorrect about about the position.
Yeah, researching it. Yeah,
I
that's terrible.
research so
terrible thing.
fucking much, dude. I promise you. I promise
Look,
you're not impressed.
Going on to Twitter. Going on to Twitter and checking out the takes online and copy and
Fuck
pasting
yeah.
them. That's not research.
Fuck yeah, that's well, that's the type of research that I do. I go on Twitter. I do nothing else. Please do not investigate my content to embarrass.
Don't
yourself.
worry, I won't.
I know you won't.
Also, I'm just fucking with you, Jangles. You're okay.
Well,
I
I love all of you.
swear,
I'm having fun.
I am too. This is
glad
amazing.
that you guys are having fun. I was a little bit scared that this was gonna get really spicy, and it did get spicy, but not in the ways that I expected it to get spicy. So good job, guys. You really, surprised me.
Hey,
for this
we like
one.
to surprise, all right? Like, we don't want to be predictable, all right? That's what a Twitch panel should be, all right? We're all like,
It's true.
we're waiting. We're waiting for
Okay,
our
you did
opportunity.
mention you were drunk before this, so okay, I'll give that to you.
I'm
You're
not-
drunk, you're
I'm
not in your right
drunk
mind,
and
I
Oh my
understand.
god,
The fact
that's
that I'm
so,
drunk
that is
incorrect
so.
makes it worse for you. It
That
makes
is-
it worse for you. That's
Okay,
so
okay.
correct.
You don't know what
I'll
you're talking
be
about,
there.
dude.
I have to get in here because I have somebody in my chat who just mentioned that Django's telling us to go outside and he has 20K tweets in 2 years. Okay, so like let's keep it real a little bit. Who's going crazy on this
tweet,
panel right
how
now?
long does it take to tweet those? How long
Look,
does
he
it take
could
to
be
tweet?
outside
I don't
tweeting.
know.
People
I don't
tweet
know.
from
I'm
outside.
outside.
I
How many
tweet from
people go
outside.
and think I
No,
gotta
nothing
tweet
tweets from
on the
outside, I'm
fly right
sure.
Dog. Oh my
Oh
fucking
my God.
God.
We all
Oh,
tweet.
All right,
Mm.
this has been
RJ,
really-
I'm
I'm sorry.
Merely walking on the sidewalk. That's what people
I'm
mean.
I'm sorry.
That's what people mean
I
when they're
have
talking about
ruined this
going outside.
panel, and I apologize.
You haven't
I've ruined
muted-
this panel
you
by
haven't
being
ruined
so
it.
correct.
Look, I
And
will actually
handsome.
thank you for this. I'll actually thank you for you've drawn the ire off of all of us, so the only one's going to get canceled. You put a target
Hey,
on
no,
your back.
no, really.
I get it.
Hey, if,
Thank you.
if-
You've
if
martyred
all of
yourself.
you,
You've
hey,
sacrificed
if any of you
yourself, and I
motherfuckers were like,
appreciate
look at these people because you wanted to cancel them for having opinions, fuck it. No, look away. Look at me. All right.
Well, I'm sorry.
Cancel me, okay? Cancel me.
Jingles.
Do not look at them. Cancel me.
No. Jingles, I need to stop you right there because if anybody's going to get credit for a shit show, it better be me. So, if you guys want to cancel anybody, I'm the one who platformed this very discussion, okay? These people are unwilling participants. I'm holding them hostage. I have their cats. And yeah, this goes to nobody else. All of the responsibility is on me for platforming this. So yes, please continue.
Talk about
It's true, I don't
irresponsible
consent to be here.
platforming, huh?
What?
I'll
Talk
support
about
you.
irresponsible platforming.
That's probably
Yeah.
bad though, right? If I support you.
Poor
Thank
no
you.
nothings in the corner, just trying to
No,
trying
no,
to survive.
no,
I'm
nothing.
enjoying the show.
Save us.
So I think we're 5 minutes to the part where other people can jump in, I guess. So and we didn't even get through, I think, like half the questions. So,
Hey, it was fun.
Hey.
I enjoyed talking with all of you.
I
this
enjoyed
is-
it
yeah,
too.
this is-
This has
When
been
I
fun. I was kind
scream-
of worried about this one.
No, when I scream, it's because I'm having fun. I promise. There's no animosity whatsoever. I do it because I have fun doing it. Okay. I need that to be
It's fun.
clear.
It
Okay.
is enjoyable.
Yeah,
Loud and
definitely.
clear.
You guys
I'm
are.
not offended.
I
that
operate
you're
the same
wrong.
way.
It's okay.
And-
I
I don't want you guys to feel like you're obligated to stay or obligated to go away. Whatever you choose, 10:30. I just start dragging people in. That's all. So, yeah, and you guys can
I
choose
have my
to go.
cat
And,
back?
we'll talk about that later. Alright.
Were we
Okay.
gonna do more questions or more topics?
I don't know. Did you guys have any like final things to say about this specific one? I guess.
I have one final question. Is that oh, Kobe, you go.
Yeah, I'm actually going to leave out because I have work later on, so I need
Okay.
to go. I guess something
Makes
I do.
sense. Yes.
It's been a pleasure talking to you about all this kind of stuff.
Thank you
all
for
of
joining.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, thanks to Cherry and RJ. I think you've probably gave it, I think, the best arguments against it in general. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, overall, I think that this is like I would consider this like this reminds me of like really complicated questions about like abortion or something like this, where it's like these are the moral frontier. There's no like easy answer anyway. You're doing a lot of there's like a really complicated, but I think it's interesting. These are great, and yeah, thank you, Stardust, for hosting it. You can follow me on Twitter at the Rustic Fool if you want to see some of my foolery. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
and-
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, Kobe.
Yeah.
Bye,
Later.
Kobe.
Bye bye.
Hey,
And-
oh! Before anyone else leaves, I was promised a birthday song.
Yes, we need to sing.
True.
It is his birthday, so everybody, we're all gonna.
No, hold on. We can't. All right, the delay. One person has to be designated to sing the birthday song because the
No,
delay
I
will make
want
it
you
awful.
all.
No,
I
all
wanted
of
a cacophony.
Well, the delay is
It's
going to be
Chaoscast.
funny.
I
That's
want it to
what
be
makes
chaos.
it good. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what makes it good is how bad it sounds. So, okay, we're all going to start at the same time. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Wick. Happy birthday to you.
Yay! That's all I ever wanted. Thanks for making all my
Awesome.
hopes and dreams come true.
You're welcome. All right.
So everybody knows I posted the link to my designer in your chat. She's also a
Oh.
good friend of mine.
Yeah, your outfit is beautiful. Okay, let me guys in chat, if you want to jump in, you just do !Discord. That is the Discord link. Don't click the link in my profile because for whatever reason, no matter how many times I update it, it's not working. So let me just pull up the question list again. I think I guess the part that we're at would be I don't know that we ever answered the question what harm is done when a person chooses to identify as a member of another community. Did we ever get through that, or
No.
did you guys want to go through that, or did you?
Wait, what was the question? I'm sorry.
No problem. Is if there is what harm there is, if there is harm that's done when somebody chooses to identify as a member of another community, I guess. I mean, we kind of visited it in like the cheapening of the experience or something like that, right?
I felt like that was what Zonia's question was when I was trying to address it, because like
Mm-hmm.
the way I think of it is like, think of it as like there's quadrants of, because we're always comparing it to transgenderism, right? And so like just a way to conceptualize is like you have authentic transgender experience, inauthentic, which is like the right-wing scare tactic. Then you have the same authentic and inauthentic transracial experience. The reason transracial, because we're trying to keep it on transracial in particular, the reason transracial stuff might be a problem is because the authentic transracial experience quadrant isn't plausible because of the kind of thing that race is. That was what I was trying to get at. I don't know. I don't know how well I articulated that the first time. But so that's why like there might be a harm associated with transracialism, but there is a kind of harm that can happen if someone's like inauthentically trying to take over some identity group or something.
I would just step in to say, like, it does seem that a lot of the like current examples, like somebody was talking about this earlier, like they're all bad examples, but I think that it's worth at least examining that so many of the examples of people that we see who are presenting as transracial are very bad examples. I think this might cue us into the sort of invalidity of the quadrant that like RJ is talking about there.
What makes them bad examples? Usually when I'm thinking of like the bad examples like Sean King and Rachel Dolezal, it's like the bad example is that they were inauthentic, but there's nothing beyond that. Like, what if you're a really good advocate?
In most of those cases, they're like I don't know, like it's like stolen valor, but for race. Like Rachel Dolezal was taking, like she took some spots that were, I believe, reserved for people of color, and like she was granted consideration under as a person of color. So like she was sort of benefiting from affirmative action that she probably shouldn't have been benefiting from. This is like again and again the case.
This is extremely arguably a different scenario. I'm not saying that this is analogous one-to-one on this, but if 30 years ago a person was pretending to be gay and they were like advocating for like gay rights, to me it wouldn't matter if they were quote unquote like authentically gay. It would matter like did they advance the cause at all, and like if they were inauthentic or not. To me, the external part of their identity is more important. In the scenario of activism, the external part of their identity is more important than the internal part of their identity, and that's where the cost is.
But the difference is that like you can specifically say what it is to be gay. Being gay is like you're attracted to men, right? Or women, if to the same sex, right?
Yeah, but even then it's like it is subjective. Like if you could imagine yourself having sex with a woman, are you a gay man?
I mean, know if like
Exactly. It's there's no hard answer there. It's always an interplay between like what your own personal.
I mean, I think it's pretty like if you're. I mean, there's bisexual people, but like if you're gay, like you like men, right? Like you can imagine yourself having sex with a woman, sure, but like that doesn't make you straight, right? Imagine.
And I'm not trying to say this is analogous to race. I'm just saying identity is more complicated than. I think it's incorrect to view identity as a true factor. All right, I think it's like there's a one objective sense of identity, because to me there is no such thing as objective identity, because
Yeah, but that's precisely the
requires-
problem.
Yeah.
That's precisely the problem with transracialism, because what it is, I'm white and now identify as black. What does that mean? What does it mean to be black?
Well, that's the thing, is like society's definitions of these things change over time, right? We can see this in how the Irish were initially treated, whereas how they're treated now. So society, racial concepts are fluid when it comes to how society views them. So I guess the argument would be that if it's fluid for society, why can it not be fluid for the individual as well?
So I think it is, or sorry, I think it is fluid, but I think that we're sort of looking at two different aspects. So where fluidity in this one aspect doesn't necessarily entail that there should be fluidity in the other. But like, I think this gets to a deeper reality of how race works. We create these racialized divides to sort of other arbitrary groups of people. So what you're what you're identifying in this sort of wishy-washy nature of race is exactly this, that what groups we're talking about vary greatly. They don't even need any sort of physical characteristic. Look at Germany in the 1930s. They put gold stars on people who looked exactly the same as any other German to create a racialized distinction. So it's absolutely true that we can have sort of different understandings of racialized distinction. But I think where that understanding breaks down in terms of a comparison to trying to be trans is that like, because of the way that we construct race, there's not really this potential for validity of being transracial.
I mean, yeah, race is not even like a real thing, right? Like it's literally like.
Well, it's the
Well,
reason.
gender is also not a real thing.
Yeah,
but like
that's what the big thing. Like as I've said like a few times, like the biggest difference between transracialism and like being transgender is because there's this body of scientific research saying that like people can point in the chat. I said this is transmedicalism, but I'm sorry, I go by what the science says, and this is how I like form a lot of my opinions, is that there's like medical and psychological and biological reasons why someone would have a like genetic impulse to identify as a trans if they're put in a certain.
But what if somebody doesn't
biggest
have that
thing.
genetic impulse, and like I don't feel comfortable
no,
saying
this
that
is-
their
no,
experience is not like being trans if they're
this
not like
is-
verified or
Well, this
verified
is-
by.
This is the difference between like pointing to identities. Like I can make the scientific case for that identity, but I'm not going to tell an individual person that if they make the choice, like, hey, same reason for like if being gay was a choice, if you chose to do that, fuck it. Why is that a problem? That is the same thing for being trans. If it were the case, like the hyperbolic case, like if you just chose out of the blue one day, I want to identify as a woman, fuck it, do it. I can't. There's no argument against that, in my opinion. But that's the biggest argument between like the validity, quote unquote, in the context that we're having this conversation of like being trans and being transracial. All right, to me that is the only distinction between the two, because there's so many analogies, there's so many like comparisons between the two. Like, is race a social construct? Yes. Is it based in some sort of like biological ancestry? Necessarily, yes. Same thing with sex. Is gender a social construct? Absolutely. Is it based on biological constructs that are immutable to a certain extent? Absolutely. Now, there's a lot of leeway. There's a lot of leeway between both of those. But the fact that they have this shared social constructs based loosely on biological constructs, that is why the comparison is drawn.
But I assume this comes usually from the left. But I think that this entire transracialist stuff is like just literally falling into a racist like trap. Like this is not something as a left winger you should support.
I'm sorry. What was that? What should
I think this is I think it's inherently racist, right? Because
What-
you assume certain characteristics, certain things that like, oh, if I identify now as black, I'm gonna assume certain like characteristics of a black, whatever the fuck that means. I don't even know. But like classic assumptions of like what a white person imagines, like a Japanese black
I'm not
person.
sure. Are you arguing against me?
No.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, I'm just saying when we're talking about transracialism, like the point of like if you're like on the left, right? The point is to be an internationalist, right? To reject all these fucking, because it doesn't matter what race you are. That's not a concern.
Yeah. The biggest like divide is like we can point to your ancestry. The issue is like that's an objective fact. We can trace your genealogy back to like a specific like location in the world. All of the like that is objective fact. Like how much should that matter is what we're actually talking about. All of that is like we can measure your chromosomes, we can measure your hormone levels, we can measure like how much what your genealogy is like. All of which matters is like what impetus, like what importance do we place on those objective variables. That's the difference between that. Those are the objective forms of like race and gender versus the subjective social constructs of like race and gender. I think that's what we're talking about. That's what the big divide is.
Where are we at right now? Just someone give me a quick recap.
Lost at sea.
Well, like I get what Bandit is saying. I think is right. So it's like we talked a lot about like what's the possibility of transitioning and stuff like that, but like we didn't really talk much about like should we look for like a future state where we accept it, and it's like no, not really, because like what does it mean to, if we try to think of what current understanding of race is, and in the future what would it mean to try to transition race, it would be like, yeah, like I said earlier, there's like that bag of things that is roughly like some amalgamation of that bag is like what it means to be black. It's like, well, in this, if we desire this world, we're desiring like a world where I can literally like, okay, I'm going to pick up these things out of the bag and become black. And it's like, we don't, that sounds like a bad way. We don't want to think about black people.
I gotta jump in here. When I say I have a lot of CRT debates, this is what I'm arguing against. It's nice that that's a world that we want to have, but to say that is what exists right now, that is very, very different. It's great to say that being black shouldn't mean anything to you, which is essentially what you're saying there with the race blind concept. But to say that to say to a black person, no, being black doesn't mean anything to you. Those are two separate things. If you want to advocate for the former, that's great, but you can't pretend that that's anything close to reality. It's like what a gender abolitionist needs to realize. Like you can say that gender abolition that will be awesome, but that's not what we have right now, and you can't like make arguments as if that is the case.
Yeah, no, I'm on board with that.
Wait,
like,
of course you can. Wait,
no, you
of
can't.
course you can.
Socrates, hey!
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah,
how's it going, everybody?
So long, man. How are you doing?
Doing good. This is my first chaos debate ever, so I'm very, very excited. Very happy to be here.
Wait, why would we argue in this way? Like, why would we argue as though something that isn't true is true?
Well, okay, wait. So
especially if we're talking about practical effects. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So just to put out, and I'm sure there's going to be just some like definitional differences that I'm happy to just accept whatever, right, when it comes to definitions. But for me, what like gender abolition
be charitable
is not that like maybe someday in the future we'll get to a world where we're all, just gray blobs and there's no difference. That's not what like gender abolition means to me. Gender abolition means to me the recognition that gender already is kind of an arbitrary thing that we could take or leave, and we can put the amount of stock into it that we want or don't, right?
I gotta jump in. Like, arbitrary doesn't mean meaningless. This is
sure, of course.
So I'm hardcore lefty, but there's a lot of like the worst arguments I hear on the left is that arbitrary means meaningless. Like that is
so
if you think that,
wait. So when I say arbitrary, I can ground that a little bit, so I can make that slightly less of like
I'm screaming
like weasel word or something, right? So by arbitrary I mean the relevant characteristics when I use the word arbitrary, which maybe nobody should use ever again because it is a pretty fucking like vague thing usually when people say. But like when I talk about like gender being arbitrary, I mean that it's like culturally influenced in a way that can change to such a drastic degree that things that are very concretely one way at one time, they change to be very concretely a different way at another time, which doesn't mean that it's not like arguably objective in the here and now, but that it's something that can change to such a radical degree without the the kind of like physical world. It's a social world that changes, which again could be objective, but it's there's some distinction that we could draw about that compared to some.
I'm not making this argument against you because I think you make it very in a nuanced way, but this is just my like soapbox to preach on. Like
Go off, King.
Culture is arbitrary. All right, culture is arbitrary. Why do we like think certain stories are cool? All of it's arbitrary. But that doesn't mean it's meaningless. Language is arbitrary. Currency is arbitrary. All of those are social constructs. It doesn't mean that we could just fucking change it tomorrow if we wanted to, right? Because there's a lot of like, you do not want to. I'm talking to you, all right?
Wait, me?
Anybody? No, you.
Oh, okay.
You, the person like looking at my. You do not want to change all the social constructs in your life, all right? You know why? Because those are the scripts in which you like understand the world, all right? You don't want to like have English be just not make sense anymore. That's a social construct and it's arbitrary. These sounds have no...
Chomsky might argue with you about that one. I don't know about that actually.
Oh, Chomsky
might not
people disagree with
Chomsky would not want to argue with me.
Oh, that's true.
You would not want to argue.
We should have Chomsky and somebody else argue about that.
Chomsky, like if Chomsky woke up to argue tomorrow and like English didn't exist anymore, he couldn't communicate his ideas. So no, he wouldn't argue with me on that.
He would do it in Esperanto.
He would do it in Esperanto. Hey, fucking Esperanto, that's a really cool idea based on these concepts here. So yeah, we need to recognize the difference between like what we would like to happen and what exists currently. And I see a lot of this in both gender abolitionists and gender abolitionists on the left and like race abolitionists, which is what I want to call colorblindness on the right. Is like, it's nice that is the goal that you want to have. That is not the society we live with. It's nice that those things shouldn't matter in the future, but you're pretending like they exist now, and because of that, you're ignoring a lot of problems that we have based on
Wait, so there's a way to square
this
this circle.
Precisely because they exist, I think that this is only adding to these things, right? This is in no way challenging the existing understanding of race.
This is indistinguishable. Yeah, this is indistinguishable from the arguments I hear from the right against CRT. It's indistinguishable.
So there's a way to square this circle actually, right? Which is that like the objective effects of race as an ideological system that we all possess in our programming affects people in measurable ways, but we can also recognize that it's not a real thing in the sense that it was created at a specific period of time as an ideological process, not a like physical construct, or like it's part of the social physics of our world. But this is something that was constructed at a given time, and we can recognize that it's like kind of inherently bullshit without ignoring the effects that it has as a system, right? Like that's a clear distinction that we can make.
I'd like to push back a little bit on this idea of tying left abolitionists with people who are colorblind, because there is a very distinct idea of being colorblind, which is trying not to see distinctions, which fails miserably. Jangles is 100% spot on when he is arguing that this is not something that we should argue for or adopt at all. But I don't think that we can meaningfully say that people who want gender or racial abolition are the same. Instead, I think we can far more charitably understand these positions as wanting to abolish the way that these things exist. That is, a gender abolitionist wouldn't want to be colorblind to gender. Rather, they would want to work for a society that abolishes exactly the gender distinctions that you're calling toxic.
We can recognize that race does matter today, while also recognizing that it shouldn't matter, and that we should work towards a world where it matters less and less and less, because otherwise we're simply essentializing race, and we do not want to do that. There's a lot of dangers in that.
True.
So do people hold on, I need to tell you. I need to ask you, all right? Because it's a big contingent we have.
Lisa, you're echoing, by the way, Lisa. I don't know if you realize.
Gotta go. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good night.
Oh, okay.
Right.
See you,
Take
Lisa.
care.
Nice.
I love you, Lisa.
Good night.
Love you too. Bye. I'll talk to y'all later.
Oh, okay.
Take care.
Let's see.
Okay.
I gotta myself. I know what happened. Sorry about that. Oh, bye.
Okay.
Sorry, continue what you're saying, Jingles.
So, wait, I'm asking this in the best way I can. So this is the contention that we had earlier. Like, would you be willing to say, do you think that it's valid for a black person today to say that black, their race, matters as a part of their identity? Do you think that's valid for them to say today?
Sure,
Of course.
Naturally, yeah.
Cool. Do you think it is, would you be willing to tell that person, okay, but it shouldn't?
Yes.
That's
I want your race to not matter anymore. I don't
No,
care.
I think
I
they
say
would
that
go
all the
very
time.
much like that.
So you would say like, hey, fuck, I don't care
no,
what.
I think
don't
black
care what
people
you
know
think
the
about your
difference
race,
between-
none of that shit matters to you.
Can I-
think that
I think
Can I- Can
I think black people would like that, in fact, right? Like, because like they wouldn't be
Can I-
killed by police, right? Like,
Yeah.
Can I come in as the neighborhood black person
sure.
and just kind of
Well,
speak on
Cherry is. I do want to give Cherry is.
Yeah, what
is
the fuck?
but yes, go. But yes, yes. Go ahead. Speak with. What
You have a
you're
great username, by the way. I love it.
that? Thank you. So what I was gonna say was that like I don't know why people have this weird idea of like black people, but black people didn't always identify as black people. In fact, a lot of the times they would identify with their own country or group. And in fact, they identified with this identity so hard, they would go to war with other black people. White people did the same. We consider French people white. We consider English people white. Them groups went to war almost every single, like hundreds of thousands of deaths. The only reason black people call themselves black people is because it started having legal and cultural pressures because of things like Western imperialism and the Atlantic slave trade that forced these identities to have meaning. And then over time, there was this kind of culture developed from that treatment. When you hear slave food, there were only certain things that African Americans were allowed to eat because the rest would have to go to the master, or they weren't even exposed to those foods because slavery had them dealing in certain geographical areas. So a lot of African culture does derive from those treatments, from that history, because I didn't know if you knew this, but history impacts today. I know, crazy radical leftist thinking, but
Sounds like
it's real.
CRT to me. I don't know about that.
it
believe in
does,
history.
right? So yeah, like it really shouldn't have ever happened. Like these bad things, just like the Holocaust, should have never happened. We should have never have accepted this. We should have never, but it did, and we have to make sure that the groups that were harmed become unharmed. Because as we see from the wealth of the average black family being a tenth of the average white family, these disparities still exist to this day, right? So we have to actively undo them, right? That's the whole point here.
Yeah, and that's the goal, right? Is to make sure that in a future far, far away, that again, as you said, as you put it, that these groups who were harmed become unharmed. And once that happens at some future point, then it will matter way less. Now, we always have to be conscious of race because race is always something that we are going to be conscious. I don't think we're ever going to eliminate racism from our culture, but we can reduce it. We can
no, of
reduce
course we can.
the effect of it, and I think that should be our pole star. So one of my concerns is, well, to take it all the way back to transracialism, all the way back, it should not matter what race someone chooses to identify as. We recognize that it does, but it should not.
What use does that have?
Does it
shouldn't.
need a use for society? If it does no harm, we can get to a point where it does no harm, why would we gatekeep it?
Because there's a different.
Well,
But I think it does harm.
Well, but I think what he's
So
positing
this
is a
is what I
post-racial
wanted-
world, right? And in a post-racial world, then these would cease to be meaningful signifiers of race. So to talk about it as transracialism in that context doesn't make sense anymore.
But
Transracialism only makes sense understanding like races as we construct them now.
Yeah,
And, yeah.
and that's precisely why they're harmful. Because in this
Yes,
world,
exactly.
in this world where racism doesn't exist, you wouldn't have transracialism.
Yes, exactly.
Now, this is getting to where I wanted to go, talking about harm. And where my position was that we are, if we're acknowledging people who claim to be transracial, we're allowing them in their presentation to essentialize that race more and more for the people who actually are of that race, right? I'm not sure. It's a very difficult thing to argue against, though, right? And that's where I kind of wanted to unpack this, is to kind of, if we can spell out what that harm is, right? So can we spell out that harm, and can we unpack
Because
that?
it's intrinsically racist.
Well,
No,
here,
no,
so
that's
I
not
could,
the
I could,
definition.
That's true.
I could
Oh,
take,
I
I
know,
could
like,
take a
this
stab
is-
at that.
This
Yeah,
is
go
the
for it.
biggest
Yeah.
like
I want to hear.
biggest problem we have.
Please,
It's the biggest problem we've had this entire panel is like we had this like pie in the sky idea of like what if race didn't matter anymore, which would be awesome, but it does matter right now, and we're trying to use like definitions that would apply in the former, that would apply in this like theoretical idealistic society. We're trying to use those definitions as if they are true right now descriptively, and those just do not work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I kept going on about like what is like the matter of fact,
But
or how things are right now. Like that is where we need to
okay,
keep
let's
things
keep
centered.
it to the right now. I'm struggling, and maybe it's just a lack of communication on my part, a lack of understanding, because I'm high on birthday cake here. But I'm struggling
birthday.
to find the thank you. I'm struggling to find the demonstrable harm outside of things like taking a spot that was meant for someone like a I forget how you say her name. Dolores?
Dolezal?
Dolezal did. Outside of that, what harm does it do? And I think Bandit said it's because it's racist. How?
Because it perpetuates racist ideology.
Sure. So I could
It
expand.
How?
reproduces-
But okay, how does it do
because
that?
it buys into racist stereotypes that exist today, how we view race today. And we know for a fact that race exists in our society. Why does it exist? Why is race there? Why is historically race introduced? It was first introduced as an explanation to enslave black people. To explain why white people are not slaves, why black people are slaves. At least in the United States context.
Okay, but
Globally,
there's
it was
a wide
also
range of
it was
things.
also used to justify colonialism and so on.
I understand, but there's a wide range of activities that people of color do that can fall under that definition of perpetuating stereotypes. But I would never go up to one and say you can't do that because it perpetuates stereotypes.
Yeah, but like
I would be
you
wrong.
no, I think you can do. The point is, you can listen to rap music, you can wear dreads, you can do all this stuff. You don't have to call yourself a black person. You're not a black person because you're.
Wait. But you saying that it's the stereotype. You're not saying because they listen to rap music they're black. That's what you're saying, right?
Hugh, would you mind turning your mic down a little bit?
But that's what people. That's what people that usually do this do, right? Like they try to present. How do you present yourself as being black? What do you do?
I think there's a
If you're
fundamental
wrong.
distinction here between identifying with a culture that has like an extant culture that is associated with a racialized group, and like actually operating in society as that group. Because we can make a great case for the people who really identify with that culture, but I got to agree, that doesn't make them this race, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, you just like rap. You're not a black person. You just like rap.
And now that a new person,
You eat kebab. You're not an Arab because you eat kebab.
now that LSP is here, I can't be in a chat with LSP. Fuck LSP.
Yeah, fuck off, because you're actually really bad at this and it's pissing me off.
Fuck
Go away,
you,
Justin.
LSP.
Go away, Justin.
Who's
All right,
LSP?
I love you, LSP.
What up,
I wanna-
LSP?
Peace out.
I
I got
promise I was. I
so many
promise I
bones
was.
to pick with you, Justin. But if you're
You're
gonna
gonna-
puss out, puss out.
Oh, you're gonna pick all the bones with me, buddy. You're
Yeah,
pick
but you're
all
not
my
gonna be here to
bones.
defend those bones. On
I promise. Stardust couldn't confirm. I was gonna leave.
He was gonna
Wait.
leave at 11. So
Is he actually running away?
no. He was actually gonna leave at 11. He
No, I'm
needed
kidding, I
to.
love you.
Yeah.
I promise. Okay, I love you all.
We
Peace,
love
Jaggles.
you.
No,
I
wait,
was-
no, but no, don't.
Right.
No, Tim, I'm.
Okay, so here,
I can't.
I
wait.
wanted to come in and just.
yeah.
I'm
Well,
not
I
trying
just-
to interrupt people.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yes, Gatheus, go ahead.
To kind of give a little bit more clarity to Bandit's points, it was more of like something that we see in a conversation around trans women today is when we talk about what makes you a woman. And when people talk about like flashy makeup, dresses, skirts, and stuff like that, what is happening in the trans community is a try to removal of this idea of like wearing a skirt made you a woman or wearing the makeup made you a woman, because that inherent part was harmful of the idea of like this is what's associated with femininity. It was not only harmful to women, but it was also harmful to trans women who felt like, oh, I don't want to wear makeup as a trans woman, but if people are going to respect me and respect my pronouns, I better do this. And clearly that was harmful to them and their psychology. So what we're trying to talk about is, you know, when it comes to gender, the defining aspect was usually about social pressures and about social identity, which, isn't always going to be perfectly lined up to anything, even sex, because even sex has a lot of genetic anomalies and has a lot of people questioning, am I really a male? Am I really a female? Because that in itself is also very arbitrary. But when it comes to like transracialism, when a lot of people say like I am black because of I listen to rap music, it's like a trans woman saying I am a trans woman because I like makeup. Like neither of these things are true. Blackness isn't defined by liking a certain thing. Woman isn't defined by liking a certain thing. And it's more of a correction of definition rather than than denying anyone's identity. It's just like, no, that's not how this works.
Although I feel like we're talking about Dolezal, right? I don't know if we could say she's like identified as black because of, you know, oh, she likes rap music or anything like that. It's probably more about just how she was raised and how she lived her entire life and her life experiences.
Well, in her
you
case,
think her life experience is what?
But what does that mean?
No, in her case, she originally described it as she found a culture that she felt more comfortable in and felt accepted in. And that was the way she originally explained it. Later on, which I think this is a post hoc justification, she claimed once she got a couple of years down the road, she came back and she ended up saying that the reason that she did it was so that because she wasn't being allowed into the spaces that she wanted to be in and be able to have a voice there. And that was why she did it. I think that was a post hoc justification. But either way, neither one of them have to do with lived experience.
Because there's a lot of evidence of her not presenting as black when she's growing up. She looks white, she presents as white. There's no evidence that she did this until later in life, where she made a conscious decision to start presenting as black.
There are a lot of trans people who don't identify with trans experience meaningfully until they're much older too.
How do you present as black? What does that mean?
Well, I guess in Rachel Dolezal's case, what they're going to say is, you know, dye. Yeah, they're going to say like dye their skin. But if you're going to like invoke lived experiences here, Rachel Dolezal passed as a black woman when she was, presenting as black. People thought she was a black person. She identified as a black person for all.
Her family disputes some of these accounts for what it's worth.
Appreciating black fashion and style is okay, but appropriating being black in order to become the president of the NAACP is fucked up.
How do you know she's appropriating it? And that she just
she was white.
She was appropriating because I know the definition of appropriating.
This is what it's insane.
Well, we just made the argument. I think we need to. I think we need to take a quick step back here and distinguish between like the appropriation that we said earlier, right? Cherry made an excellent point about appropriation earlier. That just because somebody is appreciating a culture, participating in it, and wearing things and eating things doesn't mean that they are appropriating. But it's when they take those things and then they try to adopt a new identity that is not theirs, I guess. Am I correct in portraying it that way?
Eating ramen, anybody can eat ramen, but you cannot eat ramen and then tell everybody, I'm now Japanese.
I'm sure that's exactly analogous to what everyone's saying.
That is exactly the argument that you're trying to make when you are pro-transracialism.
No. Can I offer a defense of cultural appropriation?
Oh, we're all pro. Look.
No. Like a defense of criticisms of cultural appropriation.
Okay.
Because I feel like you guys call like cultural appropriation. Nobody is out here arguing that cultural appropriation is wrong de facto. Like there is literature talking about this. Like people talk about this seriously. They investigate this. what people are worried about is like when it essentializes cultures and like facilitates in cultural erasure and shit like shit that's very obviously bad can take the form of cultural appropriation. So I feel like it does injustice to those legitimate concerns to write it off as, oh, people are worried that I'm eating ramen because I'm white.
Do you feel like there's any way that you are confusing appreciation and appropriation when you talk?
I don't think so. But also, like, for the call it appropriation, are you presupposing she isn't what she says she is? Because, like, if she was a black woman, you accept that she was a black woman, you would not call it appropriation.
But that's not how. That's not like race doesn't function like that in society.
I think
race functions in a fairly discreet way.
I think her taking the position in the NAACP that normally would have gone to a black person with the lived experience is a form of appropriation.
Well, let's back up. Let's back up.
Only if she's not black.
Why is it important that that position? Now, this is. I need to ask people. Please take this in good faith. This is not like a bad faith question. Why is it important for that position to go to a black woman with an authentically black experience,
This is
or a black person?
question. Why do you think the NAACP? Why do you feel like a black community does not get to decide what race their the person leading their movement for their race matters?
Yeah, I think it's like,
why would it matter? Oh wait, isn't the goal? Hold on. This is why I was trying to be so clear. If someone who is Asian or white or whatever could do the job better, what is the ultimate goal there?
no, I don't think it's a question of that. I think it's more of a question that you want somebody in your community to represent your community more than somebody outside of your community.
Is your community determined by your ancestry?
I mean, it depends on the culture and
no. If you want to make that argument, your community is your ancestry. This is what the problem is. Your community is your ancestry. If you're saying,
thank you, Biggs, for the raid. Appreciate it.
Cannot be black. And if you say if you conflate that with your community,
no, I'm saying that
you have the right parents. You want to have that
like
community.
African American community. It's like the community in which like you're like the NAACP is attempting to represent. Like while I know it's like democratic to elect somebody as like the certain president, I feel like it should just be an like unspoken fact that somebody who represents the community should represent the NAACP within itself, because like then you know what you're getting is authentic.
But just are you?
Thank you so much, Kyo, for the raid. Wow.
NAACP.
Oh,
no, I don't think it's that.
Hang on. There are plenty of white people in the NAACP. There's nobody saying that you can't be a part of the NAACP if you're not black.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the actual representation of positions like that, CEO of a branch, right? I think it is important for somebody with the lived experience to be representing that, because they're representing a whole bunch of people with that lived experience.
I feel like you would never apply these arguments. I don't understand how leftists, I can be in a group of leftists who can understand these arguments when it comes to transgender women or transgender men, who would never make these same arguments when it comes to transgender women and transgender men, that you don't have the authentic lived experience of a woman. But
what is the authentic lived experience of a black person?
If you want my perspective on this as a trans woman, I would not step in and try to speak for the lived experience of someone who grew up as a woman, like cis woman, right? I didn't grow up with that. I wasn't raised from, early age on as a woman.
No, I mean, you might not want to reach out. What I'm saying is other people invalidating your experiences because they've gate-kept you from what they consider an authentic female experience is wrong. If we understand it's wrong when we do it for gender, I don't know why we can't do it for race.
Okay, this was literally the entire conversation at the beginning of the panel. You missed it. Like, that all got dealt with.
Can any of you give me a definition of race that is like, what does it mean to have an authentic experience as a race that doesn't boil down to immutable genetic factors?
Definitions of race will be contradictory.
Race isn't based on any immutable.
Yeah, race is
what I'm asking you.
Definition. Ethnicity is a more concrete definition if you're trying to find something more set in stone. Race is something that's highly controversial.
Well, we're talking about race, so.
Okay, one of the
Right,
problems,
so-
just real quick. Go on, start.
Well, from what I understand, from the definitions that I've seen of race, is that it is how society looks at you and how they classify you. If I'm incorrect in that, please, correct me.
No, that's accurate. Race is very much a social construct in the same way gender is. There's nothing immutable about race. In fact, there were people with the whitest skin were considered black if they had one drop of black blood in them, going back 100 years. Race has changed. Our conceptions of race has changed. And with our current understanding of genetics and anthropology, we understand race is mostly a political categorization for people and not a biological one. It's been ingrained in people that there's a biological underpinning to it. That's just not true. And the American Society for Human Genetics and the American Anthropological Association, they've all really stated, it's basically saying race as we understand it is mostly culture, right? So where this argument keeps failing is a lot of people keep conflating this idea that race is somehow biological, that it's fixed and immutable, so a person couldn't identify with a race.
What are the issues I'm having with this real quick?
It is not race is, as you said, like it changes through time. But it is to a certain extent tied to like your appearance, right? Because you won't see a white person and say, "Oh, you're black because you are black because you have 10% of like some ancestry that's like some black person, sub-Saharan African or whatever." You won't do that, right?
So one of the problems I'm having with this discussion is we keep using bad examples. We keep using examples we can all agree are probably something that someone was doing it in an authentic way and things like that.
If I can offer an example, if you want.
Okay, please. I did mention adopted children before in a lot of cases. In there.
So one example I would think of, right, is one that I use throughout this week is somebody who is of mixed race, right? Let's say they're like half white, quarter black, quarter Mexican, right? And they look Latino and they identify more with the Mexican side of their family. Is it wrong if they are only 25%? Is it wrong for them to identify as not mixed, not white, but as Mexican or Latino?
It's scary to think that people would gatekeep whether it's right or wrong to identify as anything.
Yeah, but the reality is that it does happen. It does happen to people of mixed races, right? It's not as common as it used to be, but it used to be. Yeah.
Make a choice, and what drives me nuts is
quick.
it's totally unethical to make people make that choice. Race, as much as insofar as it's an identity in the same way gender is, not in the exact same way. Don't be cute. These are things that people need to explore for themselves, and gatekeeping that or policing that or pushing them in a certain way they might not necessarily identify with. It's a form of toxic gatekeeping that we recognize when it comes to gender, that we should equally recognize when it comes to race.
I agree with you. Guys. Okay, all right. Let's let LSP finish what he's saying. I know, Wick, that you've been waiting, but I want to get to Cherry because she hasn't spoken in a minute, and then I'll go to Wick, and then I'll go to Bandit, and then Jangles. Oh, Hugh wants to go too. Okay, all right.
I'm piecing out to make room for other people. So
love you, Jangles. Yeah, Justin, you better run away.
Your mic is making a lot of noise when you move around, so maybe if you could go on push to talk or something.
Who?
John's mic kept making a lot of noise at times. So.
Oh yeah, sorry.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, LSP, you wanted to finish what you were saying?
Basically, it's a matter of identity. So, the overall point of the debate is what harm gets produced out of this. Gatekeeping people out of an identity of their choice, can be way more immensely harmful than just adopting an etiquette that respects people and the choices they choose. Race is a deeply personal matter for people. It's a matter of privacy. People should be allowed to explore what they want to be or what they are. Actually, the idea that you even choose this is weird to me, but yeah.
Race doesn't function. You're treating race as though it functions like gender in terms of one performs a role that's based on self-identity. Race doesn't function like that at all in societies. Most robust theories of race focus on how race is created almost out of whole cloth in a process called racialization, which distinguishes someone like a preferred group from another group. Even if there are no physical differences, a racialized divide is created to justify the group preference. This idea of it
so
being
Cherry.
a personal identity,
guys, Cherry, go ahead.
Listen, you guys have said gatekeep way too many times. You're being way too fucking woke. I will not allow you to change your race as your midlife crisis. And for that, I am just arguing maybe natural selection can take its course sometimes. And I'm going to hop off now. Stardust, I love you. Your panels are great. I'm so glad you invited me.
Thank you for joining us. I know it was spicy. I hope I didn't raise your blood pressure too much. So
that was a best sign off.
I love you all. See ya.
I love you.
Bye. I'm going to go as well, Stardust, because it's getting late. And,
Okay.
I'm going to get back to my Pokemon growing. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Thank you
it's been a
for
lot of fun.
joining. Yeah.
And thank you, everybody. It's been a very pleasant conversation. It's good to see some.
It was fun
faces I haven't
stomping
seen
your
in a while.
arguments into the ground, RJ. I enjoyed it.
If you think that happened, cool. Happy birthday, Wick. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Later,
Good to see
everybody.
you, RJ.
Yeah, good to see you too, Socrates.
Take care, man.
See ya.
I realize I'm going to need to get like a long lecture on how race isn't real. With that.
So there's a lot of talk about what's the harm and why gatekeep and things like that. Now we do recognize that in certain situations there is harm when it's done, and we can look in the academic field to see this over and over again, how people are presenting themselves to be indigenous, presenting themselves to be a person of color, presenting themselves to be someone they know they are not, in order to gain credibility in the academic fields. We know this happens. I can cite you plenty of examples, and we know it's harmful. So when we talk about transracialism, we have to separate that kind of behavior, which we recognize as harmful, from behavior that may not be harmful. Behavior of people who do not try to speak for the race they are identifying, but instead want to just live their lives and be clocked as a race that they may not have been born as. I think there's a substantive difference there. I think that one does harm and one does not.
Sure. I mean, but this feels like a weird way to like invalidate people who are actually legitimately transracial. Like, you wouldn't argue that like the existence of transvestites invalidates transgender people, would you? Like, I don't understand what the value would be in invoking that as an example.
Because when we we can't swallow things whole without recognizing that there are dangers. You could have choking hazards. So instead of taking it all whole cloth, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole entirely, and we can stop.
Say blackface and cultural appropriation are bad, and still acknowledge the validity of transracial people.
Yeah.
But also, nobody is just arguing that cultural appropriation is bad. Holy
Yeah,
shit, this is something that gets on my nerves. Fucking Twitch debates always fucking do this. When people are arguing against cultural appropriation, they're arguing in specific instances that are working towards like cultural erasure and shit. They have very specific and nuanced critiques. Rather than I'm wearing a Chinese dress, a cultural appropriation, or whatever. Fucking bullshit. I'm so sorry I exploded about that. I'll go back to muting myself.
I love you.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah. So would we like to try to like define some things and maybe get some kind of basic stuff out there? So here's a question I have, right? So if we're gonna go with some like analogy about like that transracialism and like transgender, that like somebody like grows up and they are white, and then at some point they're like, oh, right, like the correct language for that would be like, I've realized that actually I'm black, right? Like I've been for whatever reason this is who I feel myself to be, right? That's the situation we're talking about. Whether or not this is a thing that's happened, whether or not this is how Rachel Dolezal felt, it might be hard to say. Doesn't seem like there's a ton of people, right? But so I feel like we got to start with at least like, what is the language that we want to use to describe these things? It would have to be like, oh, I am black, not like I want to transition to black. Like I'm not sure how to make that make sense, right? Like I don't think that's like a reasonable way of looking at things, right? So if somebody is transgender, they don't say like, oh, I've decided now that I want to become this. They say like, oh, I've realized that this is who I am.
Is this Socrates talking?
Yeah, this is me.
Yes.
In much, not being transracial myself, so maybe I can't sympathize with it, but I imagine this functions the same way as it would with people with gender, where it's never really like a snapshot, like I'm just a guy, even though I was born a girl. My understanding is identity, like the process of self-identification, I mean, it is in itself a process. And
what do you imagine? Hold on. This is really fucking interesting, because I think this is the entirety of any disagreement here.
Okay,
Why do you?
Kill a roach. I'm gonna kill a roach.
Oh fuck no! No, come back! Kill it, and come back quickly!
This is violence, and I'm not gonna stand for it. I mean, that bug. What did he do? What did the bug do?
It was
I think this is
the
a deep conversation. Yeah, we should kill the bug.
So the transracial label, at least the way we're
I want to
using
know
it,
why he I don't really want to call it assumption in bad faith, but he I guess presumes that somebody's self-identification of race would function in a similar way that it does for gender. I want to explore why he thinks that that's the case.
Just to kind of put that out.
Why isn't it equally plausible that it functions in a completely different way?
Because a lot of racial identification is
Between-
socially learned, in much the same way like the roles of genders is socially learned.
And again, we have data on this. We have stories on this, and you can look at there's countless examples of people who were adopted in a different race family than their birth race, and they grow up with this culture, and they want to fit in more. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's nothing inherently immoral with that, and I don't think it's something we should stigmatize perhaps as much as we do.
Yeah, but if they get pulled over by a cop, they're like, I'm just be less likely to be pulled over by a cop. There's this very important.
I'm ready to pay. Like you can be like in that culture and whatever, and you can be even accepted. You don't have to be black to be accepted by black people.
Well, we do realize that skin color does matter, right?
I mean, sure, but like, I mean, not to that, like if you actually grow up with black parents in a black neighborhood, whatever, right? Like, you don't have to say that you're black to
you
be
don't
accepted.
have to, sure, but these people who say they want to, like, we call it polling. We look at children, right? Like, so if I look at polling right now, pull it up, I can send to anyone who wants it, right? In a survey of 163 Korean adult adoptees, right? When growing up, 36% of them describe themselves because they were adopted into white families. So they describe themselves as ethnically and racially Caucasian. But as adults, right, typically a lot of them desist out of that, so like that ends up being only 11%. And describe the reasoning for a lot of this is because, again, you're right. How your people are perceived will matter, and it will affect your internal conception of your own identity and your own race. So if you're treated like an Asian by society, you're probably going to identify as that thing. But if someone thinks they're being treated as black, they're very likely to identify as black, even though a cop who's pulling someone over may not recognize them, so they may not suffer some of these effects.
But there are absolutely ways in which somebody who is like with white skin will not be able to experience being black in the same way that somebody with black skin will be able to experience it.
Yeah, of course.
This is a problem, though. Just real quick.
You mean like 100% of experience? Sure. But someone who's like, mixed racially or is a white passing black person, right? They'll also lack these things, but they'll still have all these other demarcators of race that we typically accept, but we wouldn't accept them.
I mean, that's the heart of the issue, right? Maravis, is that who was speaking before?
Yeah.
Maravis, yes. That's the heart of the issue. They won't be treated the same. This is going to create dissonance, and they're going to want to fix that dissonance because it's creating issues within them. So they want to be clocked by society.
Okay. Really quickly, really importantly. I think it's important to clean up our language around this because I don't know what the group of people that we're talking about. So it feels weird to talk about here's how these people feel. Are we all agreed that that's what we're talking about, or?
Oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, because that feels like probably not what like much of the conversation has been about.
Yeah.
Specifically, he's bringing up transracial adoptees because transracial adoptees means they're adopting to a diverse family, but who are also identifying ethnically and racially with that family. So it's a subset of people we would describe as transracial. But you're right, it's a little bit.
I mean, well, I just feel like this is extremely different than the conversation we were having earlier. Like because this to me seems a little bit dangerous. Because like if you have just two people, a man and a woman that we would consider, or I should say a male and female that we consider feminine, and they have a child, and that child identifies more with these feminine behaviors. The idea is that would make that child transgender is wrong and harmful. Transgenderism doesn't.
No, this is a completely different conversation. Talking about this and then moving to race, like it's not transcribable. It's hard to relate it in that way because, I mean, if you grew up surrounded by a certain ethnicity, then you can, to an extent or all the way, like be a part of that community. But if you're like raised by women and you're man, that doesn't really mean that you're going to be feminine. But even if you are feminine, it doesn't mean you're going to be like transracial. It doesn't like line
or
up.
Transgender in this case. Like you can be a feminine man. There's nothing like especially if we accept that as valid. There's nothing wrong with it, right?
Wait, all it really establishes is that the environment can influence your internal conception of your identity. That's all it does. It doesn't say because you are raised one way, therefore you will be this way.
But I think that there's a big difference in that we can acknowledge that there's gender can be based purely off of an internal perception of that, where race is very obviously not. Because even a very light-skinned black person will be treated as white in society, like unless they tell somebody that they're black. In that case, like unless they racialize themselves, like unless there is some sort of racialized indicator, they're treated as white. That's why like there's a huge difference between the two. That like John was saying, they just don't transcribe.
No, I completely understand what you're saying. That makes sense. It's just well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, so like,
I think that there's a problem here because I'm really not catching, because a lot of this talk on cultures has nothing to do with trans people. Trans women are not like males who were raised very femininely. Like that's not how this works.
Certainly,
just like
but we're
gay
talking
people aren't.
Just to kind of help you out, is we're talking about transracial people who decide that they want to identify as a race that is different from their birth, and that's a different thing. We all can recognize that's a different thing than transgender.
I mean, it doesn't even necessarily be different from birth. They might have been raised that race and like, always lived that race, but society, like racial society, might not accept them as that thing. So like, to even say that they're identifying as something else is kind of weird for at least some of these cases, because they've always identified as this thing.
I definitely agree. I don't think
the reason why this is different though is because race is purely in that cultural realm. Gender dysphoria does not originate from the way a parent may treat a child. We are still very confused on the origins, but that is not it. So when we're having a conversation about like where does this idea come from, race was specifically applied to a general group of genetic peoples, specifically ethnicities originating in Africa, that were brought into the United States. Again, it was inconsistent because we didn't have like microscopes at the time. But then as time went on, there was like the LSP was here. There was political power associated with that topic to create some sort of caste system where some people had legal rights and some people didn't. So now we're in the common day of where we have people who A, don't have that lack of political power, and B, don't have that genetic origin, identifying as something because of cultural experiences. It seems a little bit like awkward. Like it doesn't seem like this person is wrong. Like I don't think this person should be able to wear clothes that are associated with Black culture or interact with Black people, but it just seems like a miscategorization. Like there's a difference between a trans woman saying I am a woman, because that is a real psychological like gender role, and things like gender dysphoria are real psychological feelings that people have. But that's very different than that person saying, I am, like if that person was a trans woman, I am a person who has experienced female oppression, which would be false unless they did like a sexual transition, or B, I am a female, which also be false. That person is biologically a male. However, we understand that that gender role does have actual psychological, biological bearings because of the way we know animals work. Animals have gender roles. They don't have race. And that's the basis that I feel like is the fundamental disagreement here. Wolves have gender roles. Lions have gender roles.
Well,
leopards have gender roles. They don't have these racial constructs because they don't have political structures.
I mean,
that's
ants,
the thing that you
ants
see
and,
here.
and chimpanzees and things like that.
I was going to think of ants. Yeah, ants have different groups, right?
So
Indeed.
I would use I would
But they're
instead
different.
want to
No,
say-
ants do not. I know this about ants. So when it comes to ants, because this is something that happened to a group of ants that moved to North America. When we're talking about tribalism, that is very real. As in, we as like a groups associate different groups. However, racism and racialization is a very specific type where you take groups in Africa that have have less genetic similarities to each other than they do to white people, and they are making them a genetic group, and they are taking French, Spaniards, and English, who also have a lot of genetic diversity, and making them a genetic group. Why did they do this? Like they said before, political power, by separating an in-group to an out-group based on these features. However, ants do not do this. Ants of
my problem with what you're saying here. My problem with what you're saying here is you seem to be implying, correct me, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Like I said, I'm high on birthday cake. But it sounds like you are saying that you are tying race to genetics, period. Like, in order to be of a certain race, you have to have a certain genetic.
Not genetics. It has been politically tied to ancestry. I think what the really important part about what Gaithius is saying is that they perfectly describe this the way that race has been constructed politically, and it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the way that we construct gender socially. That's the key thing here.
I don't know. We've done a lot politically with gender that the patriarchy would beg to differ with that statement right there.
I think that society it really treats gender and race as they're two completely different things. I feel like it's hard to completely compare them. I think there's a lot of things that could be similar, but I feel like for the most part it's a very different topic. It has different weight to it, because with gender, I think society puts a lot more it's a lot. I think it's a lot more socially acceptable in terms of like transitioning, but I think that race, I think race is a lot harder to say, to argue wanting to transition to than gender. I don't really think they're comparable.
I think it's the attempting to transition between races is the point he's trying to make. Is like it's more of like a hard concept to grasp for the person doing it and the people around him who are like seeing it happen. But with gender, as those who like actually choose to accept it, like within society, quickly accept it. But like it's the transition between race that is still not understood by most people. I think it's just the decision of the person, and oftentimes it like almost always depends on, as you guys were saying, genetics and ancestry, and then also choice. I feel like it goes in that order, where it goes that ancestry, genetics, and then choice, because it's the transition that you gotta like think about and then choose what you are in, or choose like multiple things, like transracialism.
Zonia, I wanted to give Zonia a moment because she hasn't spoken in a while. So,
yeah, real quick one here. So, with what we're currently trying to sort of differentiate is transgender versus transracial. If I were to argue for transgender, for the transgender position, I would simply point out over the last 12 years, I guess, we've done a lot of fMRI studies, scans of people's brains, that show that people with gender dysphoria, at least, have very similar neurological activity mappings to that of cis women. Now, obviously, with that particular argument it leaves out anybody who doesn't fit within the gender dysphoria realm of transgender, right? But that's the most concrete argument I would give in support of the transgender position, differentiating it from transracial position, right? We don't have anything that says that. I don't even know if the studies have been done, and if the studies do get done, I have no idea how feasible it is that we're going to find a neurological activity mapping that's consistent with the race that they identify with.
I couldn't imagine one that wouldn't be incredibly problematic, you know? So,
right.
Yeah.
I think that like among humans, like among compared to animals, I think among humans, like among us, I think it's a lot different. It's hard to compare to animals because it's a completely different neurological mapping. Humans are so complex. The brain is something that we've just scratched the surface of. And I think if we found science, I feel like it's so hard to define what is a woman, what is a black person, other than just they're black or they have a vagina. And that's I think it's such a line that we shouldn't really define until we can understand more.
Honestly, I think it's kind of a red herring when we're discussing how race was created initially, or the quote unquote choice that a transracial person would make. Because for some of these people, one, it was never a choice, or this choice is kind of a false one because it's completely based on how they were conditioned in society or how they were raised. So it's like, I don't know how much free will is there. But going back to how race is created, I think appealing to it is a problem because I think it paralyzes you or any individual to make any progress where they're forced to conform. So, and this is what kind of Rebecca Tubell said in her transracial paper, actually. That if someone is been forced to conform, no matter how much they feel like it doesn't fit them, because they have to follow what society says. But then how do you make changes, right?
Thank you for the follows,
people start
guys.
pushing forward and start advocating
Very
for
much
different conceptions of
appreciate it.
identity, which society is not allowing for. So like you're at a point where like you're saying, oh, like hopefully it changes or hopefully it's not a problem. But then we're basically forcing the status quo and we're ingraining it and saying you can never ever move from it.
My goodness, thank you for all the follows.
Wait,
Hey,
I have a question. So if I tomorrow, let's say I live in America, which I don't, right? Like, and I go outside tomorrow, I say, oh, I'm transracially black, and I do a black face. Would that be like somebody comes like, oh, that's racist? I say, oh no, I'm actually black. No, what's up with that?
Again, right now you're doing exactly what I just said, which is like you're appealing to saying, oh, society will call it weird, therefore by de facto it's wrong. That's kind of what we're doing.
Wait. If I say I'm transracial, I'm black, and I wear a black face to identify more as a black person.
I don't think that will ever be accepted.
Yeah, but why would that be wrong?
That will never be accepted.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. But why would that be wrong if we are accepting transracial?
If we're accepting. Oh well, okay. If we were accepting transracialism, then we would accept that. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like there's a line of the accepting.
I want to give Wick a moment here to speak because he looked like he wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to bow out. It's been fun.
Okay, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I know it was long. And happy birthday to you guys. Everybody, it's Wick's birthday today. You should go follow him. Let me shout him out in the chat real quick. His handle is Death of Certainty. So please, check him out. Yeah. Very cool guy. Check out, he went full out for the animal debate. He did the full dog outfit and everything. It was crazy.
I wore dog face. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. It was really fun. It was really interesting. I'll wait to see if I get canceled or not for my takes. But yeah, see you guys later. Bye bye.
See ya. Cool. All right. I don't know where
I'm
we were.
gonna try to see if my options work.
Yeah, I don't know where we were either. I forgot.
The argument was if I go outside and I do a blackface, and we accept transracialism, would that be okay?
Well, I think people would say. Sorry.
go ahead, go.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say it. People would probably see that as like a gross miscaricature of like another.
Wait. So
Right?
okay, so this is just if you just So the question is just, if we accept transracialism, would blackface be okay? Well, sure, it wouldn't be blackface if we accept transracial. That's
I
just,
don't know. I don't know
that's
that
just
I would
a
agree.
tautology of.
Well,
I don't
It
know.
just
no,
wouldn't
no,
be
no.
blackface.
I think
it's
it
the
is
line.
actually racist, right? Like, it's just that, like, if you think that transracialism is okay, then you wouldn't necessarily have to have a problem.
Wait. Okay. So again, I want to clean up the language. So I don't think it's like, I feel like anytime somebody asks, like, is X okay? We're talking about these kind of issues. We're kind of dodging the real question, which is it true? Right? Is this like a functional way of viewing the world? Right? That's really the relevant question.
What I was trying to say
If
is
it's okay, just it's like, oh, we're gonna accept something that we actually don't really believe.
You're totally right. You're totally right, and that's why I just reject. So this is just like.
I was gonna say there's like a line, you know, like for transracialism, like when you know the person is at least part of the transracial identity that they're moving towards, then you know that it's acceptable to a point. But like when you go out and, like saying something like you're doing blackface, you know, it's like
acceptable to a point.
What's the point? So guys, if I can just interject, I don't think that even if we were accepting of transracialism, I don't think we would be accepting of blackface ever, because blackface is literally it's temporary.
I'm saying like just a second. What if I tell you, oh well, that's oppression to me because I want to identify more.
Well, because then I would say, I don't know, people who actually identify that way, they go and they get like melanin shots, don't they? Like.
Yeah, it's actually a thing.
Yeah, but like that's like, I mean, I'm transracial. Oh my god.
I mean, I think that.
So we missed the.
You understand? I mean,
wait. I feel like it's missing the whole point where like. We're comparing blackface to someone who darkens their skin in order to conform to a racial identity that they have. In the same way that, someone like is transitioning, where they're expressing themselves as a woman, versus like someone in drag. I feel like we're doing is like a conflation, which is just really weird. To point out, look how weird it is, ha ha ha. But I don't get where we're getting at.
But there's not a social stigma on like, well, for the most part, it's not socially unacceptable for like modern day, like postmodern, like views to dress up as a woman. You know, it's more socially unacceptable to like dress up as a race that you are not a part of.
Wait, but if we accept transracialism, then you are that race.
Yeah. Okay, so is this a time
thing? Okay, can we come back, because I feel like we.
Well, wait, I want to hear what Zonia is saying. I want to hear what Zonia is saying, because she's yeah.
So if we go by that argument...
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that.
Oh, it's okay.
If we go by that argument, John, then we're basically saying, well, maybe in 20 years it'll be more socially acceptable to transition race. So because that same argument, where the direction you're going with that is basically the same one that was used with people like myself coming out as, you know, presenting feminine. So at the time, you know, go back 20 years, people were saying roughly the same thing. This isn't socially accepted. Now, if you want to be a cross-dresser or something, it's an act, right? You could be a drag queen, you can go up and do an act, but you're not a woman. And then, you know, as we more and more started to come out and be more open and be more outspoken, it started becoming more culturally accepted. And so the same thing could happen with people who are transracial if you use that argument.
No, I totally understand what you mean, but this goes back to how we were saying, like how it's disconnected. I feel like the evolution of accepting gender and the transitioning of gender and just overall sexuality, gender, and overall like that facet of society, that has become socially acceptable to a point. And on like the flip side, it's like I don't think race or ethnicity or like genetics will follow that same path where you can like have the freedom to choose, because I don't feel like it should be socially acceptable to be like, hey, I'm now a part of this minority group that I am not genetically tied to. Whereas wait.
Why would genetic time matter? Okay, or I can give an example even for illustrate this. Like would you because I feel like we're using genetics like I think that's something else. Which is like more like a connection to this group, but we don't accept it. We don't accept the culture for some reason. But like, let's say I made like, let's say this is possible. Like, I created Asian DNA, right? I created Asian DNA in the lab, but I didn't use. I know I'm thinking quotes here. Quotes. But then I don't base it off of any living Asian person. So this person isn't related to any Asian person in the world. Period. They aren't related to a single Asian person, but they'll have some of the phenotypes that are typical of Asian people, right? Therefore, they have no genetic real linkage to any of these groups. So again, but then now if he integrates into the culture, right, in terms of like of Korean people, so he's like he integrates blah blah blah. I'm not going to even try to give examples because it's going to sound really bad if I do it. And then would you say this person, well, he can't really integrate into ethnicity because he lacks such a genetic tie, even if he even shares the phenotypes that are typical of Korean people? But I don't get like so what is the genetic linkage adding here?
No, I feel like the genetic linkage, the point I was trying to make is like, if not like only genetic linkage, I feel like it's you have ancestry in in your timeline, then like you decide to transition over to something that is in your DNA, and then you can say like, hey, I am now this. Okay, I feel like that can be seen as acceptable in some cases, but when you're not passing, when you cannot pass as that race that you're transitioning to, so let's say let's say you're like 1/16th black and you're not passing, and then you transition over to black, like that will not be socially acceptable by today's standards. But if you go by like something like where you can't really tell, where it's like Arab or something, and you like are like 1/4 Arab, and then you move over and try to say that you're Arab, even though you like lived your whole life in America, and like you're no longer connected to the culture via your family or anything. I feel like that is a point where that ability to transition from race to race is an argument where it can be seen on both sides, where it can be acceptable or not, because like you are passing, you know?
Well, so what you're talking about is more like assimilation. So like, you know, someone or some group of people who used to be like part of the Irish race or the Italian race or the German race, you know, the swarthy European races, right? And now they're just white, right? Or there's somebody who like might have been part of those groups that was seen as like more other, and now they're just accepted as like the kind of hegemonic white ideal, right? So there's a way that over time races of people and maybe somebody kind of within a race could be more or less accepted, right? So this is part of how race functions in America. But this is a little bit different than talking about like over a lifetime. Like over a lifetime, you can assimilate more or less. There's like white, like being white as an identity is a little bit different from other races in terms of the way that it functions, because being white is being like unbound by some specificity. That's like what it means to be white, is to be universal, to not be a specific thing. This is like when Malcolm X was putting the X in his name. Oh God, is my internet going down? This is awful. He was saying like, okay, we've been cut away from our roots, but maybe we can embrace that, and we can say like, okay, we no longer have to be tied to the specific place, the specific culture, the specific identity. We can be more like in the kind of Kantian sense of just like a, you know, like recognized as a universal mind, right? Does that make sense as like a framework for kind of
I get
building a coordinate system for these things?
I think right at the end I kind of dropped off mentally, which is my fault.
No, I think I think it's been kind of like we've kind of been through a lot of topics tonight, and I think it's been super interesting. But I think at this point everybody's getting super tired, so I may call it for the panel, if that's okay with you guys. And switch over to other content. But thank you guys for joining. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I will shout out all of you guys for being here as well. Let me just do that.
It was fun. trying to get myself canceled tonight.
I'm surprised it didn't happen. Oh, you don't have a Twitch? What? Okay. Well,
I don't have it either, so it's fine.
I'm just yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for joining. And if you guys are ever interested, I do these crazy debates every Saturday. They're usually less serious than the transracial one. Usually they're more having to do with, like, if you nut to somebody's picture without them knowing, is it a violation of their consent? Or things like, at what point does tanning become problematic? Things like that. So, yeah, if you guys are interested, every Saturday, that's what we do. So.
Yeah, I was on the pizza one.
Yes, you were on the pizza one. That one I did get canceled for. By myself. Oh, God, dude. Okay, well, that was fun. Did you guys, I hope you guys had fun.